Hi, good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy this morning to welcome everyone. We're here at the Sandler Center, and we're here for the Ignite Business Seminar that will focus on nonprofits. I can't tell you how many times I have talked to residents and business owners who've asked me when I was going to focus on nonprofits. So today is the day we're focusing on nonprofits. And today we're going to empower our nonprofits to impact the community. And so before we get started with our industry experts and presenters, I would like to have a word of welcome from our mayor, Mayor Bobby Dyer.
Hey, thank you. Okay, thank you and good morning to everyone, and thank you for being here. There are many needs in our communities. Fortunately, there are many wonderful nonprofits that bring staff and volunteers together to provide essential services. You might say nonprofits are embody the best of America. Oh, my Okay, I think I might have accidentally unmuted myself. Let's just go back and just say that nonprofits feed, heat, shelter, educate, inspire, enlighten, and nurture people of every gender, race, and socioeconomic status. They foster civic engagement and leadership, drive economic growth, and strengthen the fabric of our communities every single day. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to the people who are willing to give their time and talents in service to others through nonprofits. The work you do is very important. You are change agents. You see hope and potential where others see none. And through your devoted work, you give hope where it is the most needed. You put the magic of thinking big into action. You happily fill in the gaps, and your diligence and dedication cannot be overstated. To all of you who lead or volunteer and work for nonprofits, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your gift of time and energy makes community service work. More than that, it makes a real and meaningful difference in the lives of others. Today, you will learn how to elevate your nonprofit, whether you're starting from scratch or you're a seasoned pro or volunteer. I'd also like to sincerely thank my colleague, Councilwoman Sabrina Wooten, for hosting this workshop. Sabrina, you put together an outstanding agenda with remarkable people on a most needed topic in today's world of challenge. There is an Irish blessing that seems like the perfect way to close our message. It goes like this: May the dreams you hold dearest be those which come true, and the kindness you spread keep returning to you. Enjoy the workshop. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Dyer. What inspiring, encouraging words for our nonprofit business owners and others participants who are joining us today. What a wonderful time to be inspired. And I certainly appreciate your warm comments. And so at this time, we're going to move forward with the program. Again, I'm Council Member Sabrina Wooten. This is the Ignite Business Series. Thank you, everyone who's joining me today. The Ignite Business Series is fostered just for you, our local business owners, our small business owners, our women business owners, minority business owners, service disabled business owners. And today, I hope that you will be inspired, that you'll be encouraged, that you will be educated and receive tools and information to take your nonprofit to the next level. And so at this time, I would like to present to you our first presenter and our first topic entitled Start and Run a Nonprofit, the Nuts and Bolts of Nonprofit Organizations. And for our presenter today will be Attorney Steve Lentz. He is the partner and senior counsel at Anchor Legal Group, PLC. And so without further ado, we'll have Attorney Lentz make sure that you understand how to start a nonprofit.
Thank you, Councilwoman Wooten, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to see you today, always. I just want to begin this with the understanding that there are many different levels of people that are going to be tuning into this. And so I think the best way to orient this kind of a discussion is to talk about the actual filing for the Form 1023, which is the application for recognition of exemption. A little background on who I am. I'm actually, a businessman who is a lawyer. Next slide, please, Kevin. Both from an international and national background, business is a big deal to me. Next slide, Kevin. Also, one of the part of my portfolio for Anchor Legal Group, I'm a complex business lawyer. A subset of that is nonprofits, and a subset of that is church. And so I personally deal with nonprofits and churches in all 50 states and in several countries. Next slide, Kevin. So as we go into talking about the Form 1023, which is the IRS form that you file if you want to be a tax-exempt organization. The reason that we're going to use this as our background is because, for instance, in Virginia, we don't have an entity called a nonprofit corporation. We call it a non-stock corporation, which is our word for nonprofit. That means nobody owns it. There are no shareholders. It's a public trust run by a board of directors. And when you file for your tax exempt determination letter, you are filing for what's called a recognition of exemption. What that means is that the letter you get back from the IRS doesn't make you tax exempt. It recognizes that you are tax exempt because of what you do and who you are. And so as we walk through some of the discipline in that form, we're going to learn a lot about what the regulations are, what the government expects of a nonprofit tax exempt entity. Next slide, please. So the benefits of actually filing for your determination letter is, first of all, it assures donors of the deductibility of their donations, which is a big deal. Allows exemption for state taxes, allows nonprofit postal rates, and guarantees that the information from the form can be used later in other filings. So this is a good way to start. You have to incorporate in order to start the process. And then the second part is to file this Form 1023 with the IRS. It takes about 6 months to get the actual recognition letter back, but it's retroactive all the way back to the date of the formation of your corporation. So you don't want to basically say, okay, we've just decided we're going to be a tax exempt organization and think it's going to happen overnight. It takes a little while. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the bylaws. One of the things that you're going to need to include in a filing is bylaws. I wrote a book, which you can get on my website called stephendlentz.com. It's called The Business of Church. Actually, this is for all nonprofits. But one of the things I talk about in this particular in this particular book is beware of the cut and paste mentality. A lot of people borrow bylaws from their friends, from other organizations, and it's a really bad idea. because you don't know what those bylaws actually reflect. It should be talking about who your officers are, who your directors are, the trustees that are selected. It's a very important document, and it needs to have specific information in it that the IRS is going to be looking for. So beware of the cut and paste mentality. You really need to be sure that you're actually having someone draft bylaws for your organization. Next slide, please. So one of the things that will be included in your particular document is going to be your purpose clause. There'll be a dissolution clause, and then there'll be the operation of state law. Next slide. So the purpose clause, is where you identify that your activity is going to satisfy Section 501c3 of the IRS code. This organization is organized exclusively for charitable, religious, educational, and scientific purposes. And then if your specific purpose is limited, then you want to have that maybe as a second part of your bylaws. That's very customized, defending human and civil rights. And so this is going to be an important part of identifying whether you qualify or not as a tax-exempt organization. You can be a nonprofit corporation and not be tax exempt. However, why would you want to do that if you have the ability of actually having that determination letter? But this particular clause has to be in your bylaws under your purpose clause. Next slide, please. Thanks, Julie. Again, there needs to be a dissolution clause. One of the things the IRS is looking for is what's going to happen if your organization ceases to exist. And the dissolution clause has to say, upon dissolution of this organization, the assets are going to be distributed for one or more tax-exempt purposes within the meaning of 501c3. And so, again, that can be a default templated clause, or you can say we want the directors to be able to pick the actual 501c3 exempt organization that we're going to pass this to if it ever dissolves. Without the dissolution clause, the IRS will reject your application. It has to be in your bylaws and has to be in your articles of incorporation. Next slide, please. And so there's a narrative part of the filing for the 1023. It's the heart of your application. It talks about who you are. One of the secrets, go back there if you would, to this particular part of the 1023 is to talk about what you've done, what you're going to do, and what your future activity is. Next slide, please, Julie. And so one of the things that we talk about, people, is think like the reviewer. What is your activity? Who's going to conduct the activity? When is the activity conducted? Where is the activity conducted? How does the activity further your exempt purpose? What percentage of your total time is allocated to that activity? And how's it going to be funded? As you can tell, these are very specific questions. Next slide, please. And one of the things we really talk about, well, let's go back one. Sorry, Julie. One of the things we talk about is think like the reviewer. So one of the things that's difficult for most people who create nonprofit organizations is they're generally entrepreneurial. They're philanthropic. They want to do good things for folks. But this is not a sales piece. This is not a document where you're going to talk about every single thing you ever thought about doing. We want to make it simple when you do it. It's important to go to someone who's done this before. For instance, our firm, we've probably done 1,000 of these over the last 30, 40 years in my practice. We have 100% success rate with the IRS. But one of the things we tell our folks is don't say everything you're thinking. Just talk about what you're going to do right now. And so we can make it simple for that reviewer. I had a client who was a pastor, and his dream was to be involved in stopping sex trafficking all over the world. And so on his review, on his application, before he came to me, he put down all the countries in the world that he wanted to stop sex trafficking. Well, he was in Portsmouth. He'd never been out of Portsmouth before. But by listing every single country that he ever dreamed about, it ended up throwing his review to Homeland Security, to all kinds of different folks. And by the time it got to me, he was so balled up in the system of the IRS, he said, I don't know what to do. So I called the IRS, and the gentleman was about my age. And I said, listen, this pastor's never been out of Portsmouth. This is just a dream. He said, well, he shouldn't have mentioned all these other countries because they're all on a watch list. Angola and Sierra Leone and all these different things. So it's important on the narrative. You say what you're going to say, but just enough. And the reason I want to stick on this slide just for a second is it's important that you go to somebody who knows what they're doing. About 10 years ago, I had my knee replaced. I did not go to my dentist to get my knee replaced. I went to an orthopedic specialist. You can't wing a 1023 application because it becomes part of your permanent record. And if you get rejected, it ends up being a real blight on your record for donors and different folks. So I want to encourage you, go to someone who knows what they're doing when it talks about filing the Form 1023. Next slide. So the purpose is a big deal. Another part that you want to watch out for is part 5, which is talking about compensation. This whole part of the 1023 is meant to educate and catch any possible red flags that the organization might have at their inception. One of the things we recommend is that initially your board should not be compensated as board members. That makes it easy for the reviewer to say, oh, this is a nice charitable group. Everybody's in it for the right reasons, and they can sign off on it. So you want to make sure that if you do have people who are getting paid as board members, then you have to list their compensation, and any independent contractor who's getting more than $100,000, you have to list that. That's a red flag on the particular application. Next slide, if you would. Another thing is there is a section in Part 5 that talks about any relationship you might have between the officers, directors, trustees, family members, business relationships, because there's a prohibition against private inurement and conflict of interest. So the IRS wants to know, is this just a family group that's going to be basically stroking each other all through the process, or do you have a board that has some diversity and some independence? So if there is a related party, they might be conflicted, but there's enough board members left that are not conflicted that they can actually go forward with the project. This word private inurement is a big deal. A 501c3 tax-exempt organization is a public trust. That means it's owned by no one. It's run by a board of directors. It's specially privileged in our legal area, but because of that, there are things that can't be happening. So this isn't something where somebody can build wealth because of owning a tax-exempt organization, because you can't own it. And so people can be paid for services rendered, but this isn't something where you can build wealth for each other or just treat the organization as your own private piggy bank. That's private inurement. It's prohibited, and it can end up with fines, penalties, and a revocation of the tax exemption. Next slide. So again, this whole idea of family and business relationships, if you have 2 related people on the board, I think you need at least 3 other unrelated people on your board. So the persons with the relationship can be outvoted, and if they have a conflict of interest. So you can see the intentionality that needs to actually be in your documents, because there's very important regulations that are being followed as you have the proper bylaws and the proper setup. Next section, if you would. Next slide. So I put in here the top 10 responsibilities of a nonprofit board. A nonprofit board of directors has a huge body of law sitting on them, whether they know it or not. And so the people that are on your board in your nonprofit organization are not just your golf buddies, or your friends and neighbors who you've hung around with and your high school friends. That doesn't work for a nonprofit board because the board has specific responsibilities as fiduciaries that the regulations, both the state regulations and also the federal regulations, are going to expect of the board, whether they know it or not. Next slide. The first one, for instance, is just to understand, here are the legal duties. This is why you can't have someone who's just a nice person, but they have no clue what they're looking at. They don't know what the business part of the organization is. They're just a friend. That's a bad board choice, because the law is going to put on the board the duty of care, which means every board member is meant to be informed. They need to actually look at the financials, look at the plans, understand what they're looking at, and make informed decisions. So before a board meeting of a nonprofit, there should be reports being circulated to the board. The board should be reading the reports and be asking questions in the board meeting. That's the duty of care. It's on you if you're a nonprofit board member, whether you understand it or not. The duty of loyalty speaks about the fact that every board member is charged under a nonprofit tax-exempt entity to put the business of the organization before their own personal interests. And so that, again, is going to boil down to this conflict of interest policy, which should be part of every set of bylaws. The IRS wants there to be a conflict of interest policy. What the conflict of interest policy says is, hey, I know as a board member, you may have a life outside this organization. And so there might be instances that come up in the board and in the organization's life that you're conflicted with. And so if that happens, the conflict of interest policy says you need to disclose the conflict, you need to recuse yourself from the discussion, and recuse yourself from the vote. That's the duty of loyalty. We're putting the organization's interest above our own. And then the duty of obedience, which is compliance with the laws. So if you're a 501c3 tax-exempt entity, if you are a church, you don't have to file an annual 990. If you are anything else, you have an annual filing of 990s, which is money in, money out, compliance with the laws. That's the duty of obedience. That's the legal duties that's on a board, whether people understand it or not. Next slide, please. So, let's go through these really quickly. The first duty of a nonprofit board member is to determine and know the mission and the purpose of the organization. What are we doing? Well, if you don't know that, you probably shouldn't be on the board. There should be a mission statement and a vision statement, and every board member should rehearse that over and over and over again. Next slide, please, Skip. Also, the job of the nonprofit board is to select the chief executive. You are hiring the chief executive and the president of the company. They're charged with running the company. And so again, this isn't just somebody who's your friend or family member. This is someone who's going to be charged with the legal responsibility and accountability for what happens. Next slide. Number 3 is to support and evaluate the chief executive. I think one of the things of a good nonprofit board, and the reason I'm going through this is if you haven't had any education on your nonprofit board ever or in a very long time, call somebody like myself, because you need to have ongoing education where the board is being educated as to the responsibilities and the requirements. Are they qualified to be on the board? And so again, the chief executive and the board should do their best to adhere to the doctrine of no surprises. Are there personnel problems? What's the cash flow? What are the contracts? That should not be a surprise to the board. Those things should be being reviewed in the board meetings. And there should be at least an annual review of the status and evaluation of the goals set, compensation. That is the responsibility of the board. Next slide, Kev. Again, executive compensation is a huge deal. I've got a red button on the slide for you when you get it, because it's a hot button for the IRS. The IRS has no problem with people being paid reasonable compensation. They have a real problem with people rating the company and getting paid too much. And so excess compensation is something that if there's ever an IRS audit, they're going to want to know who the top executives are and how you arrived at their compensation. It's not, well, I decided I want to get paid $600,000. Really? Well, where did you get that number? You know, if you're an organization that doesn't bring in but $250,000 a year, that's going to be a problem. However, I was on a late board meeting on Thursday night with a nonprofit that I'm on the board in California. They're going to be bringing in $64 million this year in revenue, and we were setting the executives' compensation. And so it was related to the assets under management and the revenue of the company and the responsibilities and the different profile and footprint of the company. The IRS can penalize the organization and the board members personally if it finds out the decisions were made to provide excessive total compensation to an executive. And so if you have an executive, next slide please, that makes more than $100,000 a year, you probably want to have a compensation study done. Law firms like mine can do it, independent organizations. The IRS says if you have an independent compensation study done that tells you where you got that number from, then the board is off the hook. There's a safe harbor from personal liability for the board. I hope you're paying attention, because other than that, there are penalties that go directly to the board for allowing the executive to get paid too much. Number 4, ensure effective planning. That means financial planning, the projects, the risk management. By failing to honestly assess the threats and challenges that the organization is navigating, there would be a failure of the board at that point of one of their duties. Number 5 is, next slide, is to monitor and strengthen the program. So, okay, I know what the programs are. How are they performing? And so you don't just start a program in a nonprofit and never check it again. One of the responsibilities of the board is to monitor the programs and make sure they're working. The mayor has to do that. You know, with the city council people are constantly evaluating how they're performing with the different programs that are going on. And so again, is the cost-benefit ratio good? You may have to discontinue some programs and start other ones. Number 6, the next slide, is to ensure that there's enough financial resources. One of the main jobs of a nonprofit board member is to ensure the solvency of the organization. And so you might have a wonderful entrepreneur as your CEO, and they've got this great vision for this wonderful outreach and nonprofit, and maybe they got 10 things they want to do. A good board would look at the real solvency of the company and go back to the CEO and maybe say, you know what, I know you have a dream for these 10 things. We have enough money for 3. Pick your top 3. That's a good board, all right, because you are charged, whether you know it or not, with the financial solvency of the company. Next slide, please. Number 7, again, assist in developing the annual budget, ensure there are proper financial controls in place. Again, there should be at least an independent review on an annual basis. And if you're a big enough organization, because it's very expensive, you probably should have an annual audit, or maybe once every 5 years. There should be financial planning, internal monitoring, all of these things. Next slide. Number 8, train and build the competent board. I've just been mentioning that. This training that we're talking about today is something every board should be sitting through, because you are responsible as a board member for all of the things I'm talking about, whether you've ever been taught it or not. Number 9, Again, enhance the organization's public image. Part of the reason you're on the board is to be, a pitch person to communicate the value of the board to the community. And if you're not comfortable doing that, then you're probably not going to be doing everything you could as a board member. And number 10, next slide, is to ensure legal and ethical integrity. Are your ducks in a row? Are you complying? Are you filing your reports? Are you doing your annual report? Are you filing your 990s? Are all these things happening? So that's the reality that's happening inside a nonprofit board. And in the middle of those 10 top 10 responsibilities, I think it fleshes out what should be happening in a healthy company. Next slide, please. So, as we go through this, that compensation part, again, in part 5 is looking for excess compensation, private inurement. Is the organization coming to conclusions as far as compensation based on what's called the business judgment rule? The board is going to be judged by how they got to the decision, not just the final decision. Next slide, please. We're almost done here. Reasonable compensation. One of the things that the IRS is going to be looking for is, how did you get to the compensation decision for this? Is it reasonable based on comparable tax exempt organizations, same size, with a similar purpose, similar resources, similar geographic area? Other specific conditions. That's what a compensation study will do. It will run comps throughout the country. Next slide. And so again, the conflict of interest policy, we've hit that. Make sure you've got that. Next slide. Again, your financial data in your application, make sure there are no gaps. You need to label your financial statements clearly. It's better to predict a budget than to leave something incomplete just because there's no financial activity. So if you're a brand new organization and you're getting ready to file a Form 1023, they're going to ask you for a projected budget. That's a good faith estimate. You may not know everything's going to happen, but you have to give them some kind of a budget that you're expecting 3 years out. And so it's just a good faith estimate. If you are a small entity that is going to be bringing in less than $50,000 a year for the next 3 years, good faith estimate, then that financial projection can go through the 1023 EZ, which is a much faster process. So a long form, it's going to take you 6 months to hear back from the IRS. The easy, you might hear back in half that time. Next slide. So again, determining whether you're a public charity or a private foundation. If you're a public charity, that means that you're getting your income and your revenue from sources out throughout the community. Your church might be getting it from donations. If you're a school, a hospital, you have to receive at least a third of your income from outside the organization. A private foundation is where really there's just a very handful or less of people who are contributing to the organization, and there's a whole different profile for a private foundation. Again, as you can see, as we walk through some of the categories in a normal filing of this Form 1023, this is not for the faint of heart. It's not that difficult if you do it all the time, but it's very daunting if you've never seen these questions and you don't know what they're looking for. Next slide, please. And so again, the top 10 reasons for delay, and we're going to end with this. If there's not enough financial data, the IRS will kick it out. If the annual accounting period doesn't match from one section to another, they'll kick it out. Not enough information provided about the principal officers. You don't have to give a full resume of a principal officer or director, but you have to give a paragraph to say who is this person and why are they qualified. Otherwise, the review will kick it out. Again, if your activities don't make any sense in number 4, or if you're not filling out the schedules that are attached, if you don't send in your organizing documents, if your articles of incorporation and bylaws don't get sent in, they don't want to talk to you. They're going to kick it out. And if your organizing documents don't have the right language in there, they'll kick it out. Again, failure to include bylaws, lack of signatures. Believe it or not, people send it in 1023s all the time with no signature. They don't want to see that. And again, people will send in the 1023 and not send in the filing fee. It's $650 to file it. And next slide, the last thing, the most recent change with IRS is that now they're not allowing mail-in filings. Everything has to be done online now electronically. Big change for everything they've done. And so just a heads up on that. But as you can see, when you're navigating in the nonprofit world, what you're doing is important, but it's not your piggy bank. What you're doing is important, but it's not your company. It's a public trust of which you have the privilege of running, but you have to run it according to the regulations because you're special. You have special treatment by the law, but because of that, there is special oversight required. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve Lance, for your presentation. Certainly, for all our viewers, you can ask questions in the chat room, and certainly we'll answer them as we go. But at this time, we'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Danielle Jones, who's a financial manager for Tidewater Community College Foundation. And her topic, she's going to go over sustainable budgeting, how and what to include in your budget for your nonprofit. Thank you so much, and let's welcome Ms. Danielle Jones.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this morning. Okay. If we have the slide presentation. Sustainable budgeting, how and what to include in your budget. Now, I know this is a topic that many like to kind of run away from because we don't like to talk about budgeting because it causes us to be in a position where we have to face the true needs of our organizations and how we're going to carry out our missions. So just to kind of get started, I'm going to touch on 6 key factors. If you can go to the next slide. We're going to talk about what we need to know, how to plan, how to develop the budget, what we need to monitor, communicating and evaluating the budget. Next slide. So as a nonprofit organization, what we must remember is the budget is simply a guide. It is not something that is etched in stone. It is simply a guide that helps us to effectively manage what it is that we have, our resources, and it's to be used as a plan to help for future growth of the organization and to assess where we are in our current financial position. Next slide. Okay. So sustainable budgeting, knowing. It's important that we know and understand what it is the organization is established for, what it is that we want to do, and how we intend to do it. I like to look at or consider the who, what, when, where, and how of nonprofit budgeting. So we need to understand who it is that we want to serve. What is it that our organization wants to do and how we want to execute and fulfill our mission. We want to know what it is that we're going to offer. Offering being either a service, either some sort of support. It's important that we understand the dynamics of our organization so that we can effectively meet the needs of our community. Where, we also want to make sure that we understand the where, because we have to have a facility or we have to have some sort of avenue in order to meet the needs of our community. So understanding that is also a critical part of our process in budgeting. And how, we need to understand how we intend to get it done. We, as we go through budget cycles and as we operate and we move forward in our organizations, we also want to make sure that it's clear, we have a goal in mind, but how are we going to be able to achieve this goal? And in doing so, we need to understand what resources we have at our exposure and what resources we're going to need. And this is where we begin to become very creative in trying to understand and figure out how we're going to meet the needs of our community that we want to serve. We also need to make sure that we understand what it costs to operate your organization. Understanding means simply, what does it take from the very beginning, from startup phases, from planning, from personnel costs. All of those factors go into understand what it costs to operate our organizations. And do we have adequate systems in place to recognize and to record those transactions so that we can begin to effectively monitor what it is we're doing so we can position ourselves to grow financially in the future. Next slide, please. And planning. So this is the part that even Mr. Lentz talked about. Planning is very critical because in order to have an effective budget, we must first have a plan in order to do so. We need to really understand how we are going to fulfill the mission of our organization. If we don't understand what the mission is, then it's kind of hard or difficult to really understand what resources we need to kind of carry out our activities. So understanding the mission, knowing how we plan to fulfill the mission, who we want to serve, all of those tie in together and are critical factors in helping us to develop a budget. We also want to make sure that we understand what we want to do in the short term within 1 year, as well as long term in the years to come. And we need to make sure that we understand and we begin to develop a strategic plan. Some organizations really don't like to develop a strategic plan because it kind of forces them to focus on a particular goal. But I think it's very critical and important that each organization has a plan, not just for 1 year, but for the years to come. So probably within a 3 to 5 year period. And as the organization continues to grow and evolve, then the strategic plan is something that you would want to revisit and redesign to help meet the needs of your operations. And not only do we have a strategic plan, but I do believe that it is very effective that we make sure that our budget is tied to the strategic plan. Next slide. So develop. This is the portion of the budget or the process that many become very uncomfortable with simply because it causes us to really look at and factor in all of the key components to what our organization is going to be doing over the course of a period of time. In order to really develop a budget, again, we must know what the mission is. And so in doing so, it helps us to kind of build a framework. And as we begin to develop our budgets, we need to understand and identify what budget process or what budget method works best for our organization. Because all organizations are different, they're different in size, they're different in who they want to serve, how they operate. It's important that you identify the most effective process or effective method that works best for your organization. A lot of organizations will try to go through what they call a zero-based budget process. And simply what that means, and this is probably, I think, to be one of the most effective because it really causes you to look at what your resources are and justify all of the expenditures. So in a zero-based budget, what you're doing is simply what it says. You're starting with a zero base and you're identifying every single line item and justifying why it is that you need to have that particular expenditure and identifying all of the revenue that will come into your organization. Now, while it does take a lot of time to go through this process for zero-based budgeting, I do think that it's one that kind of really helps an organization understand all of the true needs that it has. We also have what we call activity-based budgeting, and that's where an organization will identify and associate a budget based off of particular activities. And this is for those organizations that have like projects or programs. Your budget is then tied to each individual activity within that operation. Some organizations will also use what we call historical trends to help develop a budget. Now, this one I think can be a little tricky simply because if you're using historical data, if there are any changes that come about, then it can become a little more difficult to project or predict where you're going in the future. And as you go through the process of looking at historical data, I mean, it does help with the trends to help you understand particularly what may have happened in the past, but it doesn't really talk to where you're going in the future. As you're going through the budget process, it's also important that you engage the right personnel in discussions. Now, I've been involved with several organizations that have, had very fancy or sophisticated financial statements. They've had a very sophisticated budget process, and I've even worked with organizations that have had a very simplistic budget process. However, if you're not engaging the right individuals in those conversations, then you're making decisions based off of information that may not be relevant, or it may not be the most effective piece of information to help you develop a budget. And so it's important that organizations make sure that they're including the individuals who are actually doing the work within that organization, who are carrying out those projects, who are executing those programs, because they have a wealth of information that can help set the financial framework for what it is that you need to include in your budget process. They can tell you how many individuals maybe you need to serve, and so that kind of helps you identify what costs to associate. And so, or maybe they know of projects or information that maybe you would not be as a manager or a top level manager in the budget process. Maybe they would have information that maybe you're not aware of. So it's really important that you engage the right personnel in those discussions. And then it's key that we are realistic. I can't tell you how many boards or how many organizations that I've seen develop budgets that are truly not realistic. We aim for the greatest thing, but do we really have those items at our fingertips or at our disposal? So we have to make sure that as an organization, we are really looking at what it costs to operate. Do we understand what our fixed costs versus our variable costs are? And fixed costs are those costs that are going to be consistently the same every single month. Or for the most part, at least within reason, consistently the same. Those variable costs are costs that are going to change based off of activities. So for instance, if you have a program that serves various constituents, and whatever it is that you are going to offer is based off of the number of participants. If you have 10 participants that have registered, but you were aiming for 20 or 30, then that's what we consider to be a variable cost. We simply do not know what the actual outcome would be because it's tied to a particular event or activity. And so we want to make sure that we understand the difference between that. One of the things that I like to tell organizations to do is, as you're going through the budgeting process and as you're trying to develop a budget, is to begin to write things down. For me, that's the simplest way to do it. Everything that you can possibly think of, simply write it down. From personnel costs, how many individuals do we want to have on staff? Do we want to have part-time individuals on staff? Can we afford to have full-time employees? Can we, do we have a location? Do we need to worry about rent? Do we need to consider purchasing a facility? Those are costs that we want to be mindful of. We want to think about, utilities. Sometimes we may forget that in order to operate an organization or a business, we need to have utility costs. So do we need internet? Do we need phone service? Do we need, do we have water factored into the budget as part of utilities? Do we need to pay real estate taxes? Do we have anything that we can think of? Equipment, what equipment do we have? If we have computers and we have printers, do we have a service contract? We need to make sure that two key items that we have in our budget are, accounting costs. If you're a nonprofit organization, depending on the size, you're going to have to, and you would want to have an audit. So we need to factor in costs for our auditor, legal expenses. Those are all items that we want to think of. And this is why I say it's important that we write it down, because as you're writing it down, you begin to think of various items that maybe you would not have considered during the budget process. So we want to make sure that we really understand, and this goes back to the know. We need to know what it is that we're doing so that we can identify any potential costs that could come about with or could be a result of the activities that we want to produce. We also want to make sure that we plan, because the planning part of it is where it can kind of help us grow as an organization. Do we know whether or not we'll be able to execute certain activities within a particular year, or do we need to postpone it until another year simply because we don't have the resources? And not just factoring in our expenses, we also need to factor in where the revenues are going to come from. We need to make sure that we understand it's going to cost us to carry out a particular activity or event, or to be able to meet the needs of our communities. But where are we going to receive the funding from in order to support this activity? Are we going to need to go out to solicit grants? Will we need to reach out to new donors? What kind of donors are we going to be able to work with? We have to build our network. What are we doing to help get our exposure out there so that people understand what it is that we do as an organization that will help them and that will cause them to want to support us, to give us donations to help us continue to grow. So these are all, important factors that we need to think about within the development phase of the budget process. And sometimes we need to think outside of the box. Everything that goes on within our organization, we need to think about what other organizations who may have a similar mission as we do, what they're doing. Is there potential or opportunity for us to partner with them, through collaboration? Perhaps we have, a similar or same type of program that we want to offer. Maybe we can partner up and we can go after a particular grant together where we're both benefiting from the activity while also meeting the needs of our community. And so these are the things that we, like I said, as we write them down, we can begin to get more creative in not only identifying what expenses we need, but how we're going to generate revenue to cover the bottom line. And at the end of the day, don't think that we only need to raise funds, or we need to have a balanced budget that will only support the activity. With the times that we've been having, it's also important that we begin to try to think about how we can create some sort of a cushion, have a contingency plan, have some funds set aside for like a rainy day fund where we are beginning to build the funds up to support activities in the future. A lot of individuals may say, well, we're not allowed to have any revenue left over. Whatever we bring in, we must spend. That is simply not the case. We want to make sure that what we're bringing in the door will help sustain the organization in the long run. But the purpose is, again, the budget is simply a guide and it's a tool, and that's what we use to help the organization grow. And so we want to make sure that we've identified revenues that will support our expenditures and that we can continue our operations. And as we do that, if there is leftover, if there is a contingency fund that we have set aside, that we're able to use that to support our operations going forward. Next slide. And so after we've developed the budget, we want to make sure that we have presented it to the board. It's been approved. It's something that we are ready to accept, and we're ready to implement it. And as you begin to implement this budget, and one thing I will say is with the budget process, I would probably recommend that you start it 3 months prior to your year end. This gives you ample time to review the process, think about what it is that you want to do in the upcoming year. If you've already been in operations for some time, if it's a new organization, this is something that I would recommend that you do annually with the budget process. But we want to make sure that we are prepared, that we are aware of what we're doing, how we're going to move forward, so that as we develop this budget and we begin to put it into place, then we begin to monitor. And what we're doing during the monitoring phase is we're really assessing what we've put in place. We want to see how we're moving forward. We want to make sure we understand the data that we have received, and having what we call budget versus actual reports. We want to begin to develop financial reports. And what budget versus actual means is it means you simply have a budget, you have budgeted revenue, we have budgeted expenses, and as the organization operates within that particular time frame, you are looking at the actual numbers and you're comparing that to your budget. And what you want to look for is what's off. So if you are 50% into the year, 6 months in, and you recognize that you've already expended 75% of your budget, you want to make sure that you understand what's causing that overage of 25%. And so that's what the budget versus actual does. It actually gives you a picture of what you plan for versus what is actually occurring. You also want to conduct various financial analysis. Look at the data, the numbers. I love numbers. I believe they tell a story. Let's embrace it. Most individuals don't like it. They see numbers, they get scared, but I really do think numbers are very important. And so as we begin to analyze the data, and this is, where it's very helpful. If you understand what your organization is doing, if you understand and you have a plan in place, the analysis part, I'm telling you, it becomes very simplistic. Because we have goals, we have measurable outcomes. And so as you look at the budget and you begin to look at the data, the analysis will help kind of give you some sort of indication as where you're going, where you've been, and what you need to do. It's also critical that we prepare and review reconciliations and financial reports. This information, again, it paints a picture. It tells us more information that I think people really understand or realize, but the financial reports will actually give you an indication of how well an organization is growing, how it's doing, whether or not there are some issues or shortfalls. And so it's important that we monitor and we look at this information. And financial reports should really be prepared on a monthly basis. Because we want to keep a close eye on how our organizations are doing. We need to set performance measures, make sure that we have goals in place. And, if we need to say by every 3 months, we should have achieved a specific goal, or we should have fulfilled certain financial obligations, let's make sure that we understand that. And if we do this stuff in the planning phase to say, in planning, we have, by the first quarter, we want to raise $50,000, and the second quarter we want to raise another $50,000, and perhaps the third quarter we want to decrease that to $25,000. Set those performance measures up in place so that if at the end of those quarters or those periods you've identified that you have not met those goals, then you can begin to research and understand and look at the activity, try to figure out why it is that you have not met that particular goal. Monitor cash flows. We need to, have a goal in mind. Where do we want to be? What is it that we want to achieve? We need to know what our expected outcomes are, so that we know how to prepare financially. One of the things that I personally like to do is to understand the timing and when certain revenue is going to come in, so that I know how to plan for what expenditures are going to go out the door. And so monitoring my cash flow, I can predict and plan for what may be coming in the future. So for instance, if I know that I have maybe $50,000 cash on hand and I have investments I have an investment account, and I know I have a significant activity or event that's coming up perhaps in June, as I begin to plan and assess what my costs are going to be within that time frame, then I can kind of get a general sense of, okay, do I need to draw funds from my investment account to cover operations? And so as I'm monitoring my cash flow, and I'm doing this on a monthly basis, I can plan and predict for issues or any type of shortfalls that may come up in the future, so that we're not running in a panic. Also perform trend analysis. Again, this is where we want to understand the trends of our organization. What are our peak seasons? When is it that we typically don't get enough income in to cover our expenditures? Understand when those valleys are. A lot of times for nonprofit organizations, we'll see perhaps maybe the summertime is when we're not getting in the revenue that we anticipate, simply because maybe people are out on vacation. And so as we plan for that, then we begin to understand maybe we need to do more fundraising in the the early winter and spring season to kind of help get us through the summer season, or maybe we want to do something, in the fall, or maybe we want to have events centered around activities that will draw individuals that will help us get through those valley seasons. And then understand your data. It's very critical that we understand, again, what our organizations are doing, what we want to deliver, how we're going to do it, and what the impacts are. So, for instance, for many organizations, as COVID hit, how prepared were we? Did we have to stop operations, or were we not positioned or prepared for the transition a lot from going from working in the office to perhaps having individuals working remotely? Know what that information is telling us. How are certain events going to impact our organization, so that we can plan, so that we know that as certain critical activities occur, how will that impact giving from our donors? Will that cause us to have additional expenditures? I know we can't plan for everything, but we do want to make sure that we are understanding what it is that we're doing. If something were to occur, how would that impact our organization, and how would we be able to adapt to a changing society? Next slide. And then we want to make sure we are communicating. This is one factor that I think is very important, and I think sometimes we overlook the importance of communication. We need to be very transparent. Donors or potential donors who are interested in what it is that we offer and what we're serving to our community, they are really there, in a lot of cases, to help us and to help us grow. Maybe their organization is matched up, or they are really concerned and passionate about what it is that we as a nonprofit organization is willing to offer. So if we're not transparent about what our needs are, we could be turning down potential funding opportunities from other organizations. I had a conversation recently with an organization where they had a need and they wanted to present to a potential donor how the donor could benefit from the services that we provide, or that the organization provides, and how that organization would pay for, not necessarily pay for, but financially support the activities of this nonprofit organization. And it was all about, what is it that we as a nonprofit can do to help you grow, or to help meet your need as an industry. And while that is all fine and dandy, the organization never talked about what it was that they truly need, and how the donor could actually better serve the organization itself. And so if we're not transparent about what our true needs are, we could be selling ourselves short. So while as a nonprofit, you have a specific, whether it's to feed the hungry, or if it's to provide aftercare services, or some sort of community service for the homeless, whatever it is, we know, like, for instance, a city would want to get homeless people off of the street, or may want to help individuals that don't have a place to go. Well, if we open up our doors, we're helping to get those individuals some shelter, and we're helping to meet the need of the city. But what else is it that the city can bring to our organization? How could the city potentially help our organizations grow, just in a more general sense? And so being transparent helps bring additional dollars into the door. We also want to make sure that we understand, again, our numbers. Our numbers tell a story. It tells the good, it tells the bad, and it tells the ugly. It helps to point out what we're doing really well. It points out what we're pretty much being consistent in, and it also shows us what we're not doing so well in. And we want to use that information to help assess or reassess where we are as an organization in delivering specific activities. If the numbers are showing that we're not generating enough revenue in a particular program, perhaps we need to really take a step back and think about whether or not we need to continue on that path. Or perhaps we're trying to do activities that really don't fulfill the mission of our organization. And so because of that, perhaps we're not generating revenue, or we're not being successful in in monitoring or delivering the activities. And so we want to make sure that as we look at financial statements, as we look at the numbers that are coming in, that we understand what the numbers are telling us. It's going to give us information that will help grow our organizations, and it'll give us information that will tell us what we need to potentially do to change. And we need to express and embrace the need to revise the budget. Again, the budget is simply it's a guide, and it's nothing that has to be etched in stone. It is simply a guide. So if we realize, and as we're monitoring activity and we're monitoring the financial transactions, we want to make sure that, we're looking at it, and if we see that there are shortfalls, or if we see that we have overexpended in certain areas, perhaps it's time for us to come back and really reassess what it is that we're doing, what it is that we may potentially need, or where we need to make tweaks so that we can stay on target with the budget and managing our financials for the year. And so embracing that information, being clear, we want to make sure that management is sharing with the board, because we do want to have the board's involvement in understanding and helping us to manage the financials, because they are there to advocate on our behalf. And if we see that there are challenges or shortfalls, then we want to make sure that we're including them in the conversation. And if we need to revisit a budget, then perhaps it's a matter of just understanding what it is that we truly want to do. Do we need to cut back, or do we need to expand? And if we need to expand, perhaps we need to help the help of the board to identify additional resources to help us grow. Next slide. And then finally, we want to evaluate the process. We want to make sure that we, at the end of the year, whatever your fiscal year is, we want to compare the actual budget, the budgeted financials to what was actually spent, because that will truly tell us how we did financially as an organization. It'll show us what our financial health is to help us prepare for the future. It gives us the ability to help us understand where we want to go. It tells us whether or not we've met some of our goals for the year. And so we want to make sure that we are looking at the financial statements of the organization in comparison to our budget, so that we know how to be better prepared, so that we can grow, or we can identify what programs could potentially need to be eliminated or scaled down. We want to make sure that we, again, understand, like I said from the beginning, it's all about knowing, it's all about planning, it's all about developing, it's about monitoring, it's about communicating, and then again, evaluating. Understanding how all of those factors play into the development of a healthy budget. And with this information, it helps us to prepare for the future. What is it that we want to do? Where do we need to cut back? Where do we need to expand? Where do we need to redefine what it is that we've done, so that our organizations can continue to grow financially, and that we can continue to meet the needs of the organization. And like, at the end of the day, that whole cycle repeats itself. So after you've completed your 1 year, or you've gotten through a full budget cycle, and you've conducted activities for the year, we start the process all over again. We want to keep going forward. We want to make sure that we understand what our needs are, and we want to make sure that we are able financially to support the community that we are here to serve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate your presentation, Ms. Danielle Jones. Again, we'd like to remind everyone that you can always send in your questions, your comments to the chats, and you get the answers as they come in. At this time, we would like to go ahead and go to our next presentation. If I didn't get a chance to introduce myself, my name is Caleb Monel. I am the principal with the Nonprofit Startup Center. And at this time, what I'd like to do is go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and present the next part, which deals with the issue of funding. Nonprofit, when it comes to funding, it is the lifeline. It is the oxygen of your organization. If you do not have any funding coming in, then therefore it's going to be very difficult for you to implement your ideas, to serve, and to help folks. So we're going to go into some key areas that we can present to you where you can go and look and search for funding for your nonprofit. And hope that you're going to be taking some notes. So first, when it comes to nonprofit, every single communities, what's called a community foundation. Here in the Hampton Roads area, we do have the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. And here's the information how you can access and register and sign up. They offer more opportunities for your organization to apply for competitive community grants and special interest grants. Their link is on the screen. Once you go to their website, you clicking nonprofits and you clicking apply for grant. Most likely you would need to register and put your information so you can start browsing and applying for various grants that they may have. Now, keep in mind, like I said, every community throughout the country has community foundations. So feel free to go to that link. The other part is in this great city of Virginia Beach, through the housing and neighborhood preservations, they do have local and city federal funds that you can submit for grants and request some funding. The website is vb.gov.com. Once you go to that site, then you click on government, departments, housing, preservation, about us, funding, and grants. Then you'll be able to access it. Just to give you an idea what the screen will look like. This is what the screens would look like to you. And as you could see, there's a phone number, there's an email. You can always contact and ask questions, how to register, how to get the newsletter announcements of various grants, how to submit your proposals for your grants. Because again, to your city, not only the housing and neighborhood preservation, but also there's going to be the hub local office. There's some time you can get to different other offices. So it is good to go ahead and network with your local city office and find out other areas where they may have grants available that your nonprofit can apply for. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, the website, the page Constituent Services also have various listings of different grants. And once you go to that site, again, let me just show you real quick here. Once you go to that site, the first thing you're gonna see is the Virginia grants. What we have in terms of different departments, the energy, the education, transportation, all the various departments that may have grants available. And it is ongoing, some of them are also have a timeline, but this is the main page. What's very interesting about this page for the Commonwealth of Virginia, where you can register, sign up, and apply for grants, is you can also sign up for grant alerts for different informations to come through your inbox or your nonprofit, so you can go and be aware and be informed and stay up to date about the different opportunities. When you go to that site also, they have other options, which is great what the state has done. They have also give you the link for different private grants. And private grants deal with, again, community foundations. What you do have, you have from Hampton Roads to different counties throughout the state. And so far in looking through that site, I find well over about 60 different sources of private grants from community foundation and funds and others, so you can search for. One of the biggest one that we have is the United States government. And the website is grants.gov. The grants.gov, the one great thing about this site is they also have an app that you can download. So meaning from your mobile phone or tablet, you can certainly access the information. You can certainly browse through government funding. You will need to register, and you will also have to submit some documentation to the process of proper vetting to ensure that they get all your documents. And the beauty also of that site is you can certainly submit your applications. You can search for grants through different means. So this is the federal and this is where you find HUD. This is where you find, again, the DOJ and several others. Police departments can register, cities can register, nonprofit can register, for-profit can also register because they do every now and then have grants and funding for small businesses. This is where you also go and search for things like for FEMA and others. The USAID or USAID also have listed all the funding there where you can find financials for international programs, such as in Asia, in Africa, South Central America, the Caribbean, where they're doing different programs, whether it's fighting human trafficking, whether it's helping with education, technology in those countries. You'll be able to that site go and register and search for grants according to topics, according to an area of service, according to the needs. The next one is the biggest one in the country that we have. It is the Foundation Center, now Candid. With the Foundation Center directory online, you can put Candid's all database in front of you and search for well over 235,000 foundations throughout the country. It is very fast. It is loaded with information. But the good news is you can go to that site, and let me just give you an idea here what it looks like. So you can go into foundationcenter.org or candid.org. Both of them are the same because, again, they are merging. They've been going through a merging process right now, where you can search for different fundings for your nonprofit organization. However, one quick thing I would need to mention is this is a paid website. However, the good news is for folks that live in the city of Virginia Beach, we do have the Grants Resource Center at the Virginia Beach Central Library. So if you go to the foundationcenter.org, if you go to candid.org and you search, you find the information. However, you have to be a paid member to be able to download all the information that you need for that grant. Then what you do, you go to your local library, the Virginia Beach Central Library. They have a Grant Resource Center. And the good thing is it is totally free to use the Resource Center and to access the same database that they have at the Foundation Center in Candid. Okay, now not only they have the Foundation Center in Candid, but they also have Grant Select and grants.gov. And they do also have many other information when it comes to financials for your nonprofit. So to your local city library, the central library, you will be able to access the database. You can search for programs funding for economic development. You can search for homeless programs and so forth and so on, housing, veterans, and many others. In that site, you can always email the central library or call. You don't need to have a scheduled meeting to go there. You probably just online and send an email to inquire about it. But of course, once you go, you research what you're looking for, you find it, you can save it, your thumb drive, print it, downloading it to your to the computer, and now you have several announcements of grant funding through this great access that we have here in the city of Virginia Beach. Let me just talk about this real quick. When it comes to funding or fundraising, grants is actually one area, one way to fund your nonprofits. There's so many other activities that are included in the fundraising spectrum, such as online fundraising, financial endowment, in-kind donations, special events, product fundraising, and so much. So when we are looking at grants and proposals, this is just one leg of funding, one source. So you can always develop a great financial endowment program, a great online fundraising program, an in-kind donations program, and so forth and so on. Because again, while you may be submitting and searching for grants, while you may be working on grants, you may also want to put together some events online on social media to raise some fund. You may be doing some sponsorship programs so you can keep your organization afloat. Because remember, you will have programs, you will have overheads to cover. So while the grants may take anywhere from 30 days, 60 days or more, some funding may come quicker. So keep that in mind. As a nonprofit, it is very, very important after you go through the process that Mr. Steve Lentz has talked about, that Danielle Jones just mentioned. Now, with your nonprofit team, you put together what's called a fundraising plan, which in fact will go ahead and cover your expenses for your operations and many other things for your nonprofit. Here's some ideas here when it comes to your fundraising plan. Okay. First of all, one of the key things you'll need to do once you develop the fundraising goals, of course, after you have your budget, you know how much money you're going to need to maintain the organization. But also, each and every programs that you have will need to have its own budget to sustain this program. So now you're going to go ahead and put the plan together. There's a big difference between a to-do list and a fundraising plan. So make sure that you have a plan, not just a to-do list when you are working on that. And what does entail? Definitely you have to estimate how much money you need to raise for the specific fundraiser. You need to know how much money it will cost to have this fundraiser activity. You need to know how long, how much time, what's the time frame that you have to raise X amount of dollar. Let's say you want to put together an online fundraiser, then therefore you need to know how long you're going to run it, how much it's going to cost, and things of that nature. So it is very important to have a plan and just a to-do list to say, hey, we're going to have a car wash, we're going to get some sponsors, and things like that. But in fact, you need to know the time, the costs, and other things. What's very, very important that I like to mention is when you start thinking about your nonprofit, you need to start thinking about your funding sources. Similar to having a business, you need to think about your clients and your marketing strategy. And then your fundraising plan is almost as a marketing strategy, because what you're going to need to do is get the word out and get the need out in front of people. So, in fact, you can get the support that you need financially to continue to serve and to help people. So identify sources of funding is very key. So take some time to have your team look into locally, statewide, regional, and nationwide where and how you can get some funding. One of the things that also that's important is throughout the year, you need to take some time to review your plan. Is it working? What needs to be adjusted from it? What needs to be done differently and better? What is it that you need to incorporate? Lately, have we seen with COVID, unfortunately, lots of nonprofit had to come to an end because they didn't have the proper plan to go fully virtual. They didn't have the proper plan to adjust to COVID situation. So therefore, during this process of putting together your fundraising plan and implementing it, also have a timeline where you want to come back to the table, analyze the times and efforts that your team is putting out versus the return on your fundraising plan, then to realize if it's really working and what else you need to do. The other thing also we need to mention is that part of your fundraising plans need to include heavily the local, because where you want to start with your funding research is locally. So there will be a lot of corporations, businesses that you can always reach out to. There's what's called solicited and unsolicited requests for funding. You should always have these ready, and locally, financial institutions and many others will in fact have what's called the key contact person. It might be a community outreach liaison. It might be the VP of community affairs. It might be the director of community relations. So it will take some research that you and your team to figure out, okay, where are the organizations, the corporations in my city, in my county, in my region I can reach out to and speak with the right person and submit the right unsolicited or solicited requests for funding. It is very key, because one of the things that people really sometimes overlook is, okay, now we have this organization, we have the plan, we have the projects to go ahead and help and serve. Now, where's the money? And that's key. If you don't have the money, then it's going to be very difficult for you to do that. So again, let's look at this when it comes to funding. there's always one way to go ahead and seek funding. Some will take time, some will take more efforts and energy and resources than others. However, the key thing is to have a plan to make that happen. So with that, go ahead and end my presentation so we can go ahead and go to our next session here where we're going to go ahead and show some videos, some announcements. Once we come back, we're going to go ahead with our panels and questions. Remember to keep sending your questions to the chat, and we'll be more than happy to answer them as we go. And as we're getting ready for this, we'd like to introduce our next panelist, actually, Dr. Gary Roberts, who's the director of the nonprofit sector on the Regent University School of Government. So who's going to go ahead and present on the post-COVID management strategies for nonprofit? Let's welcome Dr. Gary Roberts.
Well, thank you, Caleb. First of all, it's my honor and privilege to be here with you this morning. The nonprofit sector is, such a vital part, of our nation and our community. I have the honor, as Caleb said, of being the NPA program director at Regent University. And it is an honor and a privilege. And of course, we have a nonprofit concentration, and the nonprofit sector is such a vital component of the overall public administration community. It's always about partnership. It's always about collaboration. It's about businesses, government, and nonprofit working together. And I don't have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that the COVID pandemic has placed unimaginable strains on government, businesses, and nonprofits in terms of how they do business, even existential questions. And so what I'm going to do today is talk about COVID management strategies in conjunction with servant leadership. Because at Regent University, we emphasize servant leadership. And as I'll talk about, the research on servant leadership indicates that it really is one of the best leadership approaches that you can take for a post-COVID or a COVID world. And so let me just begin by saying here is that what we're seeing in the workplace these days is certainly a continuation of 4 mega trends. In other words, going back, the virtual workplace. The virtual workplace, of course, existed before COVID. About 20 to 25% of employees were working either fully online or partially online. And of course, that has gone up dramatically. And that trend will continue. Obviously, the pandemic has been a terrible tragedy, but one of the benefits of COVID, it's really helped accentuate how people work and think differently and think outside of the box. The second thing is that when people had to work remotely, then the virtual services had to follow. And so many more services now are online, and that affects, obviously, as Caleb has already mentioned, the other speakers, your fundraising, how you do volunteers, how you hold special events. So you have more people working online, you have more services online. And then, of course, it's affecting training and travel. You see this, obviously, with this particular event, how we're doing it, through the virtual world. And what's going to happen here is that because of organizations at Regent, for example, we've emphasized distance education for a long time. But even now, it's changed how we hold conferences, how we do adult and professional education. There's going to be fewer in-person events and more ongoing virtual events. And then finally, because of the integration of the virtual world plus artificial intelligence, almost all of our jobs are going to change. And in fact, the estimates say about 1 in 10 workers will need to change jobs by 2030 because of the problems related to artificial intelligence changing the nature of work. So this is a vital element. Next slide, please. Another element here is that you, as a nonprofit organization, a business, a government, it doesn't matter. One of the ways that you're going to have to adapt is providing your employees with virtual work opportunities. And of course, it's kind of like I always like to tell my students, like a Goldilocks approach, right? You know, you don't want your porridge too hot or too cold. You just want it just right. And so in essence here is that the same thing with the virtual workplace. Now, some employees are going to be working all virtually 100% on time, 100% virtually full time. But that's only going to be still about 20 to 30%. The rest of those who are working virtually are going to probably have a hybrid approach. And what's interesting is about 70% of employees prefer a hybrid approach. In other words, work a couple days in the office and then 2 or 3 days at home. It reduces commuting costs, it's more flexible, etc. But the problem is in this post-COVID management workplace environment, especially that's virtual, you have the problems of social isolation, the child and elder care issues, the tech tools that obviously are challenging for the virtual workplace. And then even more existential is how we maintain a community virtually. And this is one of the great challenges with distance education and higher education, is how we create a community of learners that feel like they are part of the university and part of each other. And at Regent, you know, we've invested a lot of time and energy in that and providing technology as well as other strategies for making people feel less isolated and actually part of a learning community. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about 10 elements of leadership and management elements that are essential for the virtual workplace. But I'm going to start number one with the most important one, and that again is servant leadership. As I said, at Regent University, part of our mission statement is Christian leadership to change the world. And so the idea here is that servant leadership is the form of leadership that has been documented, the research is out there across the world, that is the type of leadership that builds the trust and the relationships that are essential in today's modern workplace, virtual as well as still face-to-face. And just to give you an example of this, you know, my own research, I just analyzed 211 empirical studies on the influence of servant leadership across the world. 96% of those studies show servant leadership has a beneficial influence on employee attitudes, behaviors, and performance outcomes. And so this is where, again, whether you're in the virtual workplace or the traditional workplace, employees today, staff members, volunteers, you know, they want to be treated with dignity and respect. They want to be empowered. And that is the DNA of servant leadership. Servant leadership begins with the attitude of being a servant first. You see this obviously in the world's major religions, from Christianity to Buddhism and others. It's just that servant leaders know that it isn't about them. It is about the mission. And so the two twin towers of servant leadership are servanthood and stewardship. Servanthood basically says your job as a leader is to promote the best long-term interest of all the key stakeholders, your donors, your clients, the board, etc. It isn't about you. It's about helping them grow and to be successful. And then it also means stewardship. You know, servant leadership, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. It's not soft. It is not. Servant leadership, you are a steward. You realize that as a nonprofit organization, you have been given this great honor, this humbling honor of managing other people's money, information, and people. So in essence, what stewardship is achieving the mission with moral and ethical means, achieve the mission with excellence, efficiently and effectively. And of course, we talk about the triad, the ethical triad of deontology. Servant leaders tell the truth to their employees. Teleology, servant leaders, it's not about self-interest, but promoting the greater good. And then thirdly, a servant leader's attempt, you know, we're all works in progress. No one completely is ever there, but they emphasize the character virtues of humility, transparency, courage, forgiveness. because these are the foundational elements for authentic relationships. Next slide, please. So in essence, what servant leadership is all about, it's about a covenant. A covenant is unlike today's sort of disposable employment relationship. A covenant says is that I, as a leader in an organization, are going to invest in you. We're going to provide you with the 3 Ps. We're going to provide you, with purpose, a job that's dignified. We're going to provide you, with really, purpose. And then when you think about purpose, purpose is treating people with dignity and respect. And then the other thing here is provision. You're providing them with a reasonable salaries, benefits, working conditions. And then the other P is protection. In other words, again, you as an employee have a security in the sense that you believe your organization is not going to lay you off at the first sign of fiscal problems. And so in essence, what servant leadership is all about is really, in a nonprofit organization or any organization, is succession planning, making disciples. One of the big problems that nonprofits have today is that many of their executive directors, there is no successor. And so that has to be built in. And that's where servant leadership comes in, because you must, you decrease so others can increase. And then this is where servant leaders are humble. All the research shows this, is that servant leadership basically says when things go well, you're a window, because you recognize that success is always a team effort. And then when it comes to issues of accountability and problems and failure, you're a mirror. And then just like it says in scripture, you remove the log from your eye first. So if you really want to solve problems and encourage communication, you always need to lead with your issues first. And this is, what servant leaders do. They provide each organizational member with purpose, meaning, and significance. So there should be no one in any position, volunteer, board member, staff member, that doesn't know why their position is important for the mission. So again, a healthcare setting, CEO to janitor. Well, if janitors don't do their job well, people die, because of the antibiotic-resistant bacteria that are formed. They are part of the medical care delivery system of the hospital. And so this is where servant leaders reject looking upon people as instruments, as just means to an end. And so servant leader-led organizations, reject layoffs and termination as the first choice when you have problems. They are the last resort. And the same thing, giving people reasonable chances and opportunities to succeed. And it really goes back to, this notion of accountability. And if you're trusting and empowering people, then you're also being transparent with management information, whether it's budgeting. And when you're transparent with the information, that says, yes, we trust you. Next slide, please. And servant leadership entails sacrificial acts of obedience and service. For example, when you have fiscal downturns and you're asking your people to sacrifice, servant leaders lead first. So if you're going to cut somebody else's pay, you lead with a pay cut. If you have to lay people off in your office, in the administrative offices first, because this sets the standard of being a hearer and a doer. And so this is the standards of personal accountability. These are the standards, as you see, of servant leader courage and risk-taking. Because one of the things, too, that servant leadership does is cast fear out of the workplace. Because servant leadership basically says, we want people to grow, we want people to be creative, we want people to innovate. And see, I tell you a story, I always tell my students this, I'm a recovering perfectionist. Perfectionists like to game the system. They don't want to fail. If you're really going to innovate in the nonprofit world or any sector, you have to give people the ability, as we say, to step out of the boat and make mistakes. Like Thomas Edison, said, well, I really, there's 999 ways I learned not how to make a light bulb, and in that 1,000th time I learned. But I don't know if it actually took 1,000 times, but the point is the same. And so to give you an example of this, when I was a young man, in Pittsburgh growing up, I loved to play hockey. I started by playing street hockey. And then I decided, well, I want to play ice hockey. So I was 16 years old and I started to put on my skates. But the problem was, because I was so perfectionistic and sort of self-conscious, I didn't want to fall. And because I didn't push it, I never really learned how to skate well. And my teammates said, you know what, Gary, you're the only a hockey player that I know that skates with a limp. And it took me a while to really, move beyond that. But it's a lesson. Perfectionism is not the answer. The healthy pursuit of excellence. And you see servant leader-led organizations that prosper are embracing this approach. Next slide, please. As we talked about, empowerment is the key. In this virtual organization, you can't be micromanaging anyways. You have to empower people. You have to give them freedom. And see, the thing about it is, if you empower employees, they will become better servant followers. In other words, they'll go outside the job description to solve client problems. And then if you provide accurate weights and measures, what this really means is evaluating performance fairly with specific goals. So in the virtual workplace, as I said, people need clear goals, but they also need flexibility in terms of how they do your job. And then when you're able to do that, you're able to develop a performance coaching environment in which honest two-way communication and feedback comes in. One of the things we do, we train people how to receive negative feedback. Because, like, ladies and gentlemen, none of us like to sort of receive criticism. But if you start to realize that criticism doesn't make you a bad person, in other words, my performance doesn't define my identity. And if we learn how to give feedback in a way that's specific, behavioral, and timely, then we can actually learn how to learn together. But this is one of the reasons why performance appraisal doesn't work very well, unless you train people both how to give and receive negative feedback. It's absolutely essential. You start to do that, you start to see results. It's like an explosion. Next slide, please. And so what it really is with servant leadership, you take the long-term view of employee development. It takes all of us time. So as long as we're making good faith mistakes, again, you're patient. And so this is also servant leadership understands in nonprofit organization. You invest in all employees, staff members, and volunteers, not just the superstars. Because the research shows is that if you have a superstar-driven mentality, what happens to that person leaves. And also too, that if you think you can make your nonprofit better by hiring a superstar, what often doesn't happen is the team that made that superstar successful doesn't leave with that person. And so therefore, you're disappointed, because the nonprofit world is a team-based world. And that's why you place people in areas of gifting, abilities, and passions. So as an executive director, you need to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and then put people in those positions in those areas of weakness. And that'll exceed you, because again, it isn't about you, it's about the mission. And that's why, again, servant leader-led organizations take training and development seriously. They invest in employees, they do individual development plans, individual learning accounts, which are ways of helping folks fund their training. See, here's the thing. Most nonprofit organizations are not going to be paying people like Google. But one of the things you can do, though, is provide an environment of growth and of learning. And when you do that, you will actually get good reviews online, on Glassdoor, and these other, and so you'll get good word of mouth, because it's like a tour of duty approach. These folks may not be working for you for 20 years, but for those 2 to 4 years they're with you, if you're growing them, then you'll get that next generation of replacements. The next slide, please. So, and then of course, servant leadership is all about diversity. In other words, this whole notion of a full range of human attributes that you promote. It is so vital. And then you also throw in the fact that servant leaders don't burn their people out. This is a huge temptation in the nonprofit world. What's interesting is the research on this shows less is more. For example, in healthcare now, they're recognizing that the optimal shift for a nurse is 6 hours. And a lot of that is true in the nonprofit world, because they're dealing with heavy duty client issues, interpersonal communication. So, but the bottom line is that what you want to do as a servant leader is make sure that you have a balanced staffing, so you don't burn people out, so they've got the work-life balance that they need, so they can also invest in their families. And then a couple other important points are here. More employees are temporary, contract, and part-time. And one of the temptations the organizations have to resist is treating them as second-class citizens. If you do that, even if you are treating your full-time employees well, that will create in their mind a question that when push comes to shove, will you treat them fairly? And again, it's vital. It's a moral and ethical obligation. And that's the same thing with treatment of volunteers. This is where we talk about volunteer management. Ideally, you want to have job descriptions, for your volunteers. You want to actually help evaluate them because that says their work is important. Next slide, please. So servant leadership. Now I could stop here right now, and if you picked up a few points on servant leadership, I would be happy. But I do want to finish the rest of the presentation here because I've got some other tips, for you in terms of the virtual workplace. Again, if you're having people work remotely, especially, you need technology to bridge the physical distance. And there's where the various tech tools, come in. There's like Slack and Microsoft Teams. See, the thing is, if you're doing things virtually, sometimes it'll be synchronous, or you have, again, a conference like this, we're all together, or asynchronous when people are reviewing work that's been done at a different time. So you need technology that enables you to have synchronous and asynchronous communication, problem solving, learning together. And that means things like video calls, group chats, document sharing, meeting recordings. All these things, need to be in place for the virtual world. Next slide. Another point is that, hey, this is, I face this all the time because I teach online, we meet online, we do all these things, but tech equity is important. So if you're going to start having people work virtually, you need to make sure that they've got the training and the equipment and the broadband access to make this work. Don't, do the Darwinian approach. It's like saying, well, you need to learn how to swim, so just throw you in that swimming hole. And, well, some may, you may learn how to swim, some may drown, and then some basically it's very, very stressful. So that's important. You want to be a servant, leader-led organization. Make sure you're investing in these important elements. Next slide, please. Another element is online, you have to develop new workplace routines and rhythm. And see, the thing is, you still need face-to-face communication. So if you look at Google and some of these other places that do a lot of virtual work, they still bring people in face-to-face from time to time because that still is important. But there's still things you can do virtually. You can do things what we call virtual coffee pot in the morning. You can just have an opportune time for people to hang out. But it's also important, for people who are working virtually, have contact hours and times. Because you don't want to necessarily, you don't want them to feel they've got to be on call 24/7. So you want to limit access. And then you obviously have to practice with these new tech tools as you go paperless. And I can't tell you how important meetings are to be organized well, because I guarantee you, I face the same thing. We're all chronic multitaskers. Now with Zoom or these other technologies, it's easy to do what? Put things on mute, take the video off, and start doing other things. That's why when you're doing virtual meetings, make sure that you've got very clear objectives. You have pre-read, so people read before the meeting, so you don't have to repeat things that aren't really necessary. Have a clear agenda, have breaks, and have a facilitator. So you want to make sure your virtual meetings run well. Another important thing is peer communication and review of work. So in our educational process, in the nonprofit classes that I teach, we have peer review. So we want to make sure that others can view and then offer constructive feedback. Next slide, please. And again, you have to train your managers to learn to manage differently. As we've already talked about, empowerment doesn't always come naturally. So we need to train our managers to empower, and they have to trust employees, because you can't really micromanage really a virtual workforce anyways. That's why you have to set clear performance metrics and allow flexibility. But you also need to be visible too. So you need to set daily check-in times and opportunities to talk and with problems. So that's very vitally important. Next slide, please. Now, If you start to do all these things, you will create a culture of engagement. Now, with engagement is vital. When employees are engaged, they're motivated. They work outside of their job description. When there are problems, they work outside to solve, client problems. And that only happens if you've got a healthy workplace where fear is driven out, you empower them. But here's the thing, the research shows this. We can show you in the private sector, for every 1% increase in employee engagement, it results in higher profits. In the nonprofit world, it's simply better customer treatment and better efficiency and effectiveness. So it's absolutely vital that you create and check the pulse, of your employees. But servant leadership consistently is shown to be the leadership approach that engages employees. Next slide, please. Another element here is that as the COVID epidemic has shown, our mental health is in crisis. The levels of anxiety, the level of depression in the general population as well as employees has gone up. And I can tell you this from my own experiences. I've suffered with anxiety and panic disorder for many, many years in my younger days. And it's a form of hell. And it was especially difficult in the workplace because in those days, people were afraid to tell the truth. And so people covered it up. In today's world, you need to destigmatize mental health, stress management, coping, depression, anxiety. You need to educate your managers, educate your employees, and view it not as something to be ashamed of, as something that needs to get help for, just like any other physical problem. And there's where you have to have EAPs, counseling, education, and that destigmatization process. Next slide, please. And that goes back to whole person health. I mean, one of the things that frustrated me so much with this COVID epidemic, and it's so sad, is that, we have obviously frontline workers who are essential. And for so many months of this epidemic, we sent them to war without the proper equipment. It's like sending people to battle. They didn't have the proper PPE, the training, the flexibility, the hazard pay. It really was a national disgrace, for some employers. Now it's getting better, but this is a dress rehearsal again that all nonprofits as well as others should be learning from this. If you love your employees, you will protect them. And this means then also you should have what we call a workplace hazard monitoring and audit process. In other words, it's not enough to simply put some posters, about occupational health and safety. You need to be talking to your employees on a regular basis about how they experience safety and health in the workplace. Surveys, focus groups, retention and exit surveys, and then act upon that. Ideally, have a joint, team of staff and volunteers, that address this issue of health. Next slide, please. And then DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can guarantee you today that after the terrible summer we endured with George Floyd and others, the emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion has really dramatically increased. The data shows this. Millennials and Generation Z, it is so important to them, as it should be important to all of us, because discrimination, of course, is a sin and an evil. But I guarantee you, as you recruit staff, your millennials and Generation Z and others are checking out your website. They're looking at your reputation on Glassdoor. If you don't have a reputation for being diverse and inclusive, then you will lose out in the battle for talent. And so it's not, first it's a moral imperative, but it's also a practical imperative. That's why you have to make sure your organization has a formal diversity plan, and you're not creating bottlenecks in hiring, advancement, or the quality of life. And then next slide here, please. The other part of this is, because of the virtual workplace now, competition is not even local or even statewide anymore. It's now national or even international, because there are more virtual opportunities. Your nonprofits are competing with others, and there's where your wages and your benefits and your working conditions, have to be obviously competitive. But this is where I recognize, a lot of you can't pay a significant, high level salaries. But if you're able to invest in your staff and your volunteers, as we talk about like the tour of duty, you're 2 years they're there with you, and you're intrinsically motivating them, and you're adding value to their life skills and their experience. They have work that's significant. They have skill variety. They've got task identity. They're producing a work product that they identify with. If autonomy and feedback. If you're doing these things, then you'll have an advantage in the recruitment battles for the talent that is going to be essential for the next generation and this generation to be successful in the nonprofit world. And then the last slide here, the final slide. Next slide, please. So I just want to say, we're kind of like ending where it began. Whether you're talking about pre-pandemic, whether you're talking about in the midst of the pandemic, whether you're talking about post-pandemic, the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is the same. This is one of the things. So the thing about it is that there is no leadership elixir. Really what it is that it's the heart of your leaders to love their employees, love their volunteers, love their board members. And it's treat people with the golden rule. And then obviously there's some other steps here that we talked about. But if you do that, you're going to be successful in almost any setting, virtual, face-to-face. Because these soft interpersonal skills of servant leadership, ladies and gentlemen, think of it this way. It's like cement, right? Cement initially seems soft. But then when you basically put that cement down, you lay down bricks, it becomes hard. It becomes the foundation. And so all the research shows that if you want to be a manager, successful manager, your technical skill may get you there, but your interpersonal skills will help you, are the reason you're successful. So again, there's no substitute for the servant leadership and the golden rule and how we build long-lasting workplace culture. So again, I really thank you, the audience, and all the members. I have some references here. If you have any questions about servant leadership or any way that I can assist you, I would be delighted. My contact information, I know Caleb has it. I don't know if I don't have it here on the slide, I guess. But it's been my honor and privilege to spend this time with you. And I just pray God's blessings on all your hard work in the nonprofit sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. We certainly appreciate your presentation here. At this time, what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break for some of you to stretch your legs and get a glass of water. And we're going to come back with some very good information and a great panel discussions here. And feel free to continue to send your questions to the chat. And once we come back from the break, we're going to address all the questions and go straight with also the great panels that we have here for you. Thank you.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Well, hello again. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. We're still in the morning part of our day. But I want to just say thank you to all the presenters that presented, Attorney Steve Lentz, Ms. Danielle Jones, Dr. Gary Roberts from Regent University, as well as Mr. Monell, gave some very excellent presentations. I just said to someone, I'm learning so much today. I've been in the nonprofit sector for about 12 years, and I can tell you today, there's some things I just didn't know that I learned. And so I just want to say thank you again to all our presenters. I'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors. It's so important that the Ignite Business Series seminar has sponsors. And so I want to say thank you to the Nonprofit Startup Center that's led by Mr. Monell, who is the collaborator here with me today and collaborated on this event and co-hosting with me today. And I'd also like to take a moment to say thank you to Girlfriends Tea, who is also a sponsor of the Ignite Business Series seminar. And I'd just like to have a word or so from Ms. Sabrina Brown, who is the actual owner of Girlfriends Tea. So Ms. Brown, could you say a few words about your organization?
Good morning, Councilwoman Wooten and guests. Councilwoman Wooten, I want to thank you for the opportunity to sponsor this event. Girlfriends Tea is a virtual women's talk show where we feature professional women. I want to inform everyone of our upcoming first annual conference, which will be held virtually on Saturday, April 10th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. To find out more, visit our Facebook page at Girlfriends Tea with Sabrina. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you.
And thank you, Ms. Brown. Again, Girlfriends Tea is a sponsor of the Ignite Business Series seminar, as well as the Nonprofit Startup Center, where Mr. Monell is the CEO of that organization. So thank you so much for being a supporter of the Ignite Business Series. Now we want to transition to a very important part of our session for today's event, and that's our panel discussion. And so for our panel discussion, we want to talk about the role of nonprofits in the pandemic and how they have been on the front lines. So often I hear of nonprofits serving just tirelessly throughout the pandemic. And I also hear the need for resources, during that time as they serve. And so I was really interested in putting together a panelists of industry experts who could speak to their role and how they have served during the pandemic, as well as what type of resources they need to be successful, and any other important pertinent information that should be shared with the nonprofit sector. So Mr. Monell, he's going to help us lead this discussion, but I'd like to just say just a few words. Mr. Monell and I are a part of a national organization, and it's a national organization, an association of nonprofits, organizations, executives. And so both of us are a part of that organization for our work and have been recognized for our work with nonprofit organizations. And so in that NANO, it's called, in that organization, they teach us how to work with nonprofit professionals, particularly boards. As Mr. Lentz discussed earlier, your board, the organization of your board, the type of board membership that you have is so important. And so this national organization helps us work with boards, chairmen, to ensure that our nonprofit organizations are being successful, that they are equipped, and that they adapt to change. One of the areas that NANO focuses on is making sure that nonprofits develop a for-profit arm within their program that helps them become more entrepreneurial and more sustainable in the workplace or in our business sector. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Monell to start our panel discussion. We have some great industry experts with us today, and we'll hear from each person. They'll tell us just a little bit about their nonprofit and what they do, and then we'll get right into the discussion. So Mr. Monell.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Sabrina Wooten. We appreciate it. And thank you for putting this great event together. First, we'd like to have our council member, Mr. Michael Bellucci, who's going to give us a few words on from experience and his heart for the nonprofit community in Virginia Beach. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank my colleague, Council Member Wooten, for the invitation to join this conversation, and thank everyone for participating in this important dialogue about the role of nonprofits in our community and the health of nonprofits during this particularly difficult time. And I also want to thank all the nonprofit leaders and volunteers and those who are participating in this dialogue, and for all the work they do to serve our community. As you mentioned, I serve on the City Council in Virginia Beach, and I also work for the Chrysler Museum of Art, which is a very important cultural institution within our region, and volunteer for many other nonprofits whose missions I'm very passionate about. And I think that we all recognize that nonprofits serve a critical function within our Virginia Beach community, and really throughout Hampton Roads and the nation. They provide critical services on which many of us rely, including many of the most underserved and vulnerable members of our community. But they also provide services we enjoy, such as arts and culture, and many other aspects of what makes life great in our community. And all of those functions are represented in the panel you have here today. But I think what's important, and during this COVID era, that we're so hyper focused often on small businesses and making sure that our economy survives, and we need to be, of course. But the role that nonprofit plays in that is also critical. Nonprofits are employers. Nonprofits play a role in our economy. They're not only employers, but they're participants in the economy. They're purchasers, and the health of our nonprofit sector is equally as important as the health of our small business and business sector. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're focusing on that today. I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Michael Bellucci. At this time, we're going to hear from Stephanie Graham from the Volunteer Hampton Roads Organization, awesome organization in Hampton Roads, helping out the nonprofits. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much for your work.
Okay, there we go. Unmuted.
Super.
Thank you, Mr. Monell. It's a pleasure to meet you. I look forward to meeting up with you sometime to learn more about your organization. The work you're doing sounds amazing. Thank you, Councilwoman Wooten, for inviting me to this important discussion. I'd love to just take a moment to talk about what Volunteer Hampton Roads, who we are, what we do, and then just talk about the incredible role of volunteerism in our region during the pandemic, and how volunteers are an amazing resource for nonprofits. If your nonprofit is not currently accessing volunteers, let me tell you why you should. So Volunteer Hampton Roads, we're a 501c3 organization. We were founded in 1957, 64 years old. I mean, I can't say that I am actually 64, but our organization is. We are the only regional connector of volunteer services. We serve the Peninsula, Southside, Western Tidewater, and the Eastern Shore. We have over 200 nonprofit partners, 65 corporate partners, and 40,000 volunteers. And as a 501c3, we are dependent on charitable donations like all our peer nonprofit organizations. We connect, equip, and mobilize. For our companies, we're connecting them with the volunteer opportunities. We're equipping our nonprofits with resources and we are mobilizing just our community at large for getting involved in service. Next slide, please. How we do that, we are a team of 4 staff, but we are mighty. We are engaging with nonprofits, with corporations, with localities on a daily basis. We try to keep our finger on the pulse of what the needs are, what the resources are, and how we can connect those. We do that through leveraging the power of people, leveraging the talent in our workforce, and matching those CSR pillars of companies to meet the needs of the nonprofits in our community. Not only connecting the volunteer resources, but sometimes, and we usually hope, that there is funding to follow to help our nonprofits. Next slide, please. I just want to kind of talk about how volunteerism has changed a little bit in COVID-19, not just with us, but with our nonprofit partners. A lot of focus on meeting on the essential critical services in the community. Using skills-based volunteers to fill in any staffing gaps that nonprofits have, either through layoffs or wanting to build their capacity. Utilizing volunteers to really help get those much needed items packaged and distributed out to the community. Really looking at going away from event funding to asking for program and service funding. And just connecting nonprofits to be collaborative and partner with each other to increase effect. Next slide, please. Just a snapshot of the amazing work we've been able to be involved with our partner nonprofits. I mean, the community has stepped up, and this is just a snapshot of the pandemic response. Over 9,400 volunteers serving 45,000 hours in that essential service that I spoke about. These are just examples of if nonprofits are not utilizing volunteers, this is exactly the resource that can help you right now. And I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for your great work with the Volunteer Hampton Roads. And let's now welcome Crystal from 1701, and another great establishment in Hampton Roads helping out the nonprofit. Crystal, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. How are you?
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks. I am right here at 1701 this morning. I appreciate that and being here. Could we also have slides up? I'm ready to roll and do we have my slides as well?
I think our tech support is working on it. Here we go. Awesome.
Oh, great. There we are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So I want to go ahead and first of all, welcome you. So I'm honored to be joining you this morning. I am the 1701 Community Operations Manager. I have a background in nonprofit, which is why this really is close to my heart. And now working with a nonprofit organizations, actually several here. You all have a special place in my heart because of my nonprofit background and where we are. And I want to share my journey in nonprofit today and sharing solutions that I see every day firsthand now. So let's see. All right, so what you have here in front of you, it's trendy now. Some of you may not have heard of it. Some of you may be already in a co-working space, so I want to share that. It's actually, the whole co-working idea has been pre-existing, pre-COVID, and 1701 is a co-working space. It's an innovative place in the Vibe District of Virginia Beach, down near the oceanfront, very innovative, and that's why we have a lot of networking opportunities. Some of you may have already been familiar with co-working spaces, but for those of you who do not, I introduced this concept in comparison with a gym membership. So it's a membership for professionals like yourself. Entrepreneurs, e-commerce, contracted solopreneurs, as I like to call them, nonprofits. either way, we are an intentional environment that supports small business owners and, of course, our nonprofits. So as a nonprofit organization, we do expect to have a clean, safe community environment when we're working, whether you're at home, whether you are meeting with other team members and so forth. And I want to approach that as well. Not ready for that slide yet. Can we go back one slide? There we go. Thank you. Either way, it's a space where you can choose your workspace to fit your needs, and either a designated desk daily, pop in daily. You can get your work done or print documents daily because we provide that as well, and you don't have to be using your printer paper. And it's an option also to have a virtual option. I've heard in some of the presentations mentioned in some of the questions about business addresses versus a home address. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. We call that our virtual office with a trusted business mailing address and someone who will keep your packages safe and signed for, scan or shred your documents, recycle your junk mail, and a smiling face to hand you your mail as well. So co-working spaces, in my opinion, are a genius way to save money that should be going to the folks that you need it to. And it's also a great spot for if you need a brick and mortar space, you have a desk, great coffee, a place to take a Zoom call, like our photo booth, our little booth that we sit in for to take calls that are private, and somewhere for your client to come and even just sign a document. I am also a notary, so we have amenities like notary services, allowing you to focus on your time in growing your clientele and constituents within your nonprofit. All right, next slide. So what you see here, my work is driven by statistics, so I felt that this one was very interesting and important to share with you because it's a concept in order for us to move forward. And I will be sharing my journey with you in nonprofit in a few moments as well. But these statistics kind of show us where we were as commuting Americans working from home and the increase. 30% of those that went from 4% pre-COVID 30% are predicted to continue this trend post-COVID because what businesses are seeing is that it's cost effective. So that's where I want to kind of talk about moving forward, my place in this. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so let's talk nonprofit. We're going to take a look at how we work in response to current impacts that we're all feeling and how we can adjust and how we work more effective now. We're kind of finding out organically what wasn't working before and what we've had to be forced to do has actually turned out to be a little more effective. So I literally started onboarding during a corporate office closing for a national nonprofit organization. I was a development manager for Southeastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Pre-COVID, the organization was already having to cut costs and restructure, so costs could be downsized, and therefore the collected donations could be saved for their intended purpose of helping others like you all. So we closed our office of many years that they had it prior, and I still have these weird nightmares over the cost loss of just even sledgehammering the desks that we could have sold and brought back in, and there was so much just money wasted. I would have done things very different than hauled a lot of stuff away that we were using rather than on a truck to be gone and to the dump. I think that there were some things that we could have restructured in the way we did work in order to save that cost. So soon after we closed that, I ended up getting a laptop, cell phone, a brand new printer, all sent to the front porch for my front porch of my home. And I was given a corporate card for office items we needed, but most likely because I'm working for nonprofit, you feel that guilt when, you know, you kind of want to put that money to somewhere important. So of course, a lot of my paycheck went towards printer paper and coffee and food and stuff when I would go meet with folks and not having to use that card. So in Dollar Tree for office supplies, it was much easier for me just to go grab stuff rather than having to go through the process of asking. So with that said, I also felt super isolated. I was in a community of networking, and that was why I got into nonprofits, so I could help others. And I really needed to be successful in this shift with that nonprofit business. So I tried to be in the community as much as possible because that was my intention for working in nonprofit. And the organization was very personal to my family. So the passion had been driving me all over Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Richmond, Suffolk, Williamsburg, and all over Virginia Beach daily. This meant I was required to document miles that my organization would have to keep up with and then put back in my paycheck, which I always felt guilty because I feel like that money should have went towards the folks that we were trying to help. More money was taken away from those that actually need it in the organization, and they just didn't feel well with me. What I found better was working in a clean coffee shop or meeting my supervisor at a Panera were my best days because of the interaction, the networking, the need for that natural lighting, the need to feel like we were a productive business and not cooped up in a home office. So my supervisor was feeling the same, and at one of our Panera meetings, we discussed the need for that networking and that this was not working for us. And so we sought out a co-working space. With that, I had to drive 45 minutes, not miles, I apologize. 45 minutes to Norfolk from my home, from here in Virginia Beach, pay for parking, sign in, go up like 12 flights on the elevator. It took me almost an hour to get into that space from my house, so mileage and time. So working space had coffee on tap, was a place with a beautiful view to erase that tension. Fast forwarding, my entire market was eliminated due to COVID's impact on our area. So I lost my job due to that in nonprofit. And our entire market was eliminated because of the money that was not saved along that. So today I'm a creator. I'm actually at 1701 because of a local, a person that was in local office had posted the job for this, and because I wanted to see nonprofits do better. So in that, this was my home. So today I'm surrounded by the most energizing, forward-thinking business and nonprofits. While I was working in a co-working space for remote work, we have survived here, and we have a lot of businesses and nonprofits that are flourishing. So I advise you to reach out to me as well. We can certainly move over to the next slide real quick. I know that we're running out of time, and I want to share why our nonprofits have flourished. One thing that has been extremely fascinating to me that our nonprofit organizations have continued to build their teams in this pandemic. And that's impressive to me. So I've done a lot of asking them about what has worked for you. And you see some of these things on the screen, but they continue to do these things for their community. And I reflected on what's kept coming and daily to get that work done. How are they proceeding through this dynamic? So with that, their constituents and team members are used to signing at our front desk. We all wear masks, there's safety. They really like having things like the boardroom conference space so that they can come in. So instead of, they have a desk here, they have the printers, they have the coffee, but also we have our space. We have amenities that include bikes to go for a stroll to alleviate that stress. We have private sound booths for private calls, and we have Wi-Fi when many areas like random weather and so forth. They also have enjoy their supplies being delivered right here with our virtual mail system. And that goes back to the business address and 5013Cs. So I do want to share, meanwhile, my checks used to go to my home address, and I was not comfortable with that. So I'm going to actually, can we just go to the last slide so I can share my, we can fast forward through that. There we go. So I would love to meet you. Please welcome. You're welcome to, we have our website. If you go in here, the QR code goes straight to it. You're welcome to email me. I can talk to our nonprofits here as well if you have specific questions. We have blog pages that are on our site that might be helpful to your business as well. And I want to thank you for all you are doing in our community. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you. And now let's welcome Margaret Foltz from Virginia Beach Arts Center. Margaret, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today, and welcome to everybody who joined. I also want to, say thank you to Council Member Wooten for coordinating this, and all of the speakers thus far. You guys have been great. I've been in the nonprofit sector for, over 20 years. And it's great to hear those nuggets of information. You sometimes forget some of those pieces, and this has been fantastic. So just to tell you, as in the interest of time, I'm kind of reworking in my head how I'll present. So just to give you a little bit about the Virginia Beach Arts Center, and then I'll also add in nuggets about how we kind of went through the pandemic and things that we shifted. So you can see the Virginia Beach Arts Center offers an educational and supportive environment to inspire people of all ages and skill levels to experience, engage with, and create art. Next slide, please. We do this through various methods, one being community engagement, one being here you can see our exhibitions. If you go back one slide, please. Those exhibitions, we have 10 hanging for the month, and there's 2 other exhibitions that go on that are more like a fundraiser type of thing, as well as a holiday. But 10 that we do, we really try to focus on the local artist. We typically have first Friday openings where we celebrate the winners of the exhibition. And you can see here, there's lots of people, it's fun, engaging, and as we all know, that is totally not happening anymore at this point. So what we did just to kind of shift the way we did business, and I can't thank our board enough, they helped me so much over the past year. We were able to take these exhibitions online. So not only people were able to attend a quasi, if you will, through Facebook Live, to announce winners, look at pieces, and we really tried to push the chat box, if you will, just to kind of get people engaged with the presentation. But then we also had all of the art pieces on our website there so they could scroll through and see the different pieces of art. And we were very lucky. We're a visual arts organization, so it has been a little bit easier for us to be able to shift a lot of these things online than many others. And oh, my heart goes to them. I will say, actually, next slide. Another thing we do is we have a gorgeous pottery. We've got 10 wheels. We've got 3 or 4 kilns now. Incredible instructors. We've got great materials, tools. And again, here's a picture where you see lots of people engaging together. However, again, it's another earned income that is not, we can't count on, right? For a long period of time. We're actually coming back now, which is very exciting. And I actually want to talk to that. We have classes, both pottery and art. As we reopened, if you will, after the quarantine, we really worked hard to not only create and share our COVID mitigations, but we really pushed it out to the public. Before everything else, we wanted people to feel safe when they came into our building. We are taking it very seriously still. So as people come back, exciting to see, they're coming back safe, fun, happy, enjoying themselves. There's far fewer people coming in right now. We're following. But we're hoping as things progress, we'll see. And we shifted slides. This is our art education. Again, lots of people together. Various mediums are being worked on in our art classes. We've got origami, we've got watercolors, we've got cold wax. We've got lots of different types of things that we're offering. And if you'll shift to the next slide, last year, this actually is a very good representation of what it's felt like there, that image right there, where you don't see a whole lot of people. And we've been trying to work through it because it's very important to us that people can engage with art is just a part of human experience. And so we have reached out to people not only through, the socials and emails and newsletters. We're trying to engage with people, just in in every facet, providing materials. We've done demonstrations online. We've tried doing classes online. And I can't say enough, I just want to touch a couple things, how much I appreciate and have had to rely on our board of directors over the past year, not only in some of the organizational shifts, but I think our treasurer reworked the budget 3 times last year. It was bananas, just trying to kind of make sure we're covered no matter what the case would be. We've got that earned income stream through those classes, but we also accept contributions. And I will say that over the past year, being an arts organization, when we went out to do solicitations, we really went back to the people who have supported us in the past, and thankfully they came out strong, and we really do appreciate that. Granting opportunities, and I can speak specifically to the city of Virginia Beach. The Arts and Humanities Commission folks, holy moly, have they been such an asset in helping us understand. I can tell you with a lot of the foundations and grantors ask questions. They're willing to help, they're willing to answer. And we just appreciate everything that everybody's been doing. And then, just touching on the management focus of things, again, we work very hard. We have a small staff too, but we worked hard to make sure that they had time and space to navigate this pandemic on their own while we were still getting, work done and planning for when, things would ramp back up. Or again, reiterating the safety protocols that we put in focused as we're kind of inching back towards some sense of normalcy, if you will, as we get more shots on arms. We're planning for an influx of people. We are really excited. We think that people are going to come back, and they're going to come back strong, and we're be ready for it. We've redesigned our website. We've got lots of classes. We're prepping staff and volunteers. We're working on updates, like really working hard so that when the public comes back, we're going to be ready for them and have some fun together.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Margaret. And now, for the interest of time, we have another great speaker. It's Jeff Hammer. He's a wealth manager with Northwestern Mutual. And Jeff has worked with a nonprofit, both regional, national, and even national, in raising, planning, and managing multi-million-dollar funding. Jeff, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Caleb, and thank you, Councilwoman Wooten, as well. It's just an honor to be here and hear some of these great folks speaking and experts in their space. And one of the things that really drives our team is we really enjoy that aspect of being able to see how we can propel great folks forward who have a great mission and vision for what it is they want to accomplish. So we love saying, how can we help them do that? And as we do that, some of the things that we see are there's always that operational tension as well as that strategic tension of how do we fund today's needs today, but also get that leap forward that says how we're going to be here 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now. And so as we go through that process, what we really want to work with organizations on is to say, how do we find that right balance? How do you get that annual funding? How do you get the leap ahead money as well? And as part of that, what we see is that a lot of your gifts are going to come in. They're going to be very transactional gifts, and those are the lifeblood. They keep the lights on. They keep folks paid. They keep the vital services going. And the great thing about this is that some of those gifts, there are ways that we work with organizations to say, how do you get those 5 to 20 times multipliers that are often available off of every dollar? Because a really well-run nonprofit gets about 80 cents out of every dollar to handle because they all have operating costs. But we really work to say, how can we shift to get as many of those dollars getting those 5 to 20 times the impacts? For example, a young man in our team, 23 years old, for $9 a month, he's a $100,000 donor to a cause he cares about. And the way he's doing that is through a term life insurance policy where he's designated a specific organization as his benefit. The great thing is these ideas are scalable. A lot of folks, when we look at it, it doesn't matter if it's $10 a month, it doesn't matter if it's $10 million. The ideas are scalable. And as we see that, some of the key things that we look at is working with organizations to refine their case statement. Because as we shift to some of those strategic gifts, what we find there is transformational donors are looking for that transformational impact. They want to say, we're not just giving to keep the lights on, but how do we propel you forward? How can we enable you to have, a dozen more art exhibits? Or how can you help 5,000 more folks in the community? What's that for? And as we do that, that's where we really fine tune and say, if you get that 60 seconds with Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, or that local equivalent, what are you going to ask for? And so that's really a refinement of that case statement. And then we dive into what are those gift multiplier tools. There's a lot of different ways charitable trust strategies can be used. It can be the gift of privately held stock in a business. We've had gifts of intellectual property, one of which may result in a very sizable gift just by someone using their patent rights or royalty streams. A lot of creative ways that these kinds of gifts can come in. And the great thing there is a lot of nonprofits just don't have the staff to be able to absorb that kind of one-off gift, but we work with them to adapt their giving statements as well as any investment policies they may have to say, hey, look, these are ideas we are willing to entertain, and go beyond the gift of cash or appreciated stock that most organizations would take, because a lot of those transformational gifts can be a little peculiar. We had one gentleman, for example, was very interested in setting up an endowment, and as we went through his listing of assets, he was, he had done well with his assets, but was cash flow challenged. And as we look at that, we got to the idea of his timber rights, and we said, there's your endowment right there. Go harvest the timber and come back and replant. Keep working your way through that, and as you get to the end of that, taking about 4% a year of the timber, come back and start all over. There's a lot of creative ways folks can do that kind of giving, and that's where we love playing in that space, because everybody's story is different, but if you turn the Rubik's Cube, there's oftentimes a way to unlock that multiplied gift. And I think a couple things there as well. Part of what we're seeing is also this, what could be an emerging opportunity. With the new administration, there's been conversation about lowering the estate tax threshold. Right now, someone can exclude 11.8 million from estate taxes. That's dropping to about 3.5 million. Still a sizable number, but there's a decent number of folks when you start to think about it, when they factor in their businesses, any insurance, any investments, their houses, and so forth. There are folks that are going to come in over that threshold, and as we have conversations with them, that conversation typically goes to, if you have funds that are going to be taxable, you really have a choice. What would you rather give away? What would you rather, see remain with your family? Or what would you rather give away in your taxes? And most folks have a preference and say they'd rather give it to folks or causes they don't care about. And there are ways to do that. And so there's a lot of great planning that can be done there to unleash that. And we're happy to be a part of that, to see these great organizations get propelled.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. After our next speaker, we're going to go ahead and take the questions. Let's welcome now Kate Pittman from Vibe Creative District. Welcome, Kate. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you all
Awesome.
for having me. Thank you to Council Member. Wonderful invitation, and also to Councilman Berlucci for all that you do to support nonprofits in the area. I did have some slides. If they're not able to be pulled up, that's no problem. I did want to just share really briefly that Vibe Creative District is a representation of Virginia Beach's first arts district. Here we go. And the word Vibe actually means Virginia Beach. It's a shortened abbreviation of Virginia Beach there. This is a designated geographic location that was defined by the City of Virginia Beach City Council in 2015. And then along with that, I work for a nonprofit that is composed of community leaders. You can skip to the next slide there. And really grassroots efforts. So here is that adopted City Council map from 2015. And if you jump to the next page, you can see what it looks like today, all populated with art and businesses and entrepreneurs, all synergizing here in the Arts District of Virginia Beach. Next slide, please. I work for a nonprofit. We have about 25 nonprofit board members who really strategize and work on our budget and help us think about our connection and what we do here in the city of Virginia Beach to help small businesses grow and to really support creative arts. But it really comes and people who are committed to their community and finding new ways to support what is happening. And so here are some of those images from the early days, pre-COVID, of course, when people just got together and had conversations about how to implement these strategies. You can skip to the next slide. And we consider ourselves a positive press engine for the city of Virginia Beach. Here's just a couple few years. We've had 49 new businesses open, including 5 in 2020 during COVID, which was really remarkable. And we're very, very excited that the City of Virginia Beach City Council recently adopted and that launched in the Vibe District in 2020. Go ahead and skip to the next slide. a little bit of play. There you go. So this was the that we kicked off in the Vibe District, and that was profit to try to influence and support small businesses. And we appealed to the city council and to city leadership after researching all across the country to come up with a really help support small businesses, because though there are some very large fish out there, it's some local communities are small businesses really to the supporting them. Here in the Vibe District, we saw a tremendous return on investment for those dollars, and we are excited to see what happens. I like to share this quickly, just to share with everyone that when you dream big, big things can happen. And mentioned as an identifying factor for the city of Virginia Beach. And when you have a community that works together, community, you see that recognition nationally on the show Jeopardy. Please skip ahead to the next slide. What's really happening most here here that shows a image of street corner like it's completely revolution. In a 5-year study of what's been happening in the Arts District, there's been a 20 million. It's primarily because of investment. And what you see here, an example of some creative businesses that have come in and completely changed the street corner. So we're here to help and encourage you all. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Kate. Now we're going to go into our first question. Someone has asked a question, and probably it's going to be to Mr. Lenz about starting a CDC, a Community Development Corporation. And they're stating that they already have a nonprofit, but they'd like to start a CDC. Any guidance?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think one of the things that's important for someone who wants to start a CDC is to understand that it is a normal 501c3. It's the same application. But I think the unique thing is the connection to the founding organization or the organization that has birthed the concept. For instance, many CDCs will start from a church. And, it's a good idea for the board of a CDC to be not just made up of church members, for it to really appeal in its broadest footprint to the community. However, it's also important to the church not to lose the DNA of the organization that they had a vision for. So what I mentioned to the chat that came in is there's an art to connecting the governing board of the CDC and the originating entity in such a way that the optics don't look weird. That the community can see it's a community development company that's going to help with the poor. It's going to be available to, for grants and funding. But in a faith-based organization, part of the discussion that someone like myself would have when we're creating the bylaws is to ask them how controlling is the faith component of this CDC. The Title VII, and also there's legislation in Virginia that talks about prohibiting discrimination for a broad range of areas, including now social and gender issues. However, churches, are permitted to discriminate for religious purposes if, in fact, their basic documents are accurately portraying their commitment to different doctrines of their faith. So when you get into the CDC world, it's a wonderful idea. It's something that many times will target the lower end economic ends of a community, try to refurbish things, not exactly like the Vibe is doing, because that's very commercial, but you're talking about low end housing and benefits going to the community. If it's being birthed out of a faith-based organization, serious discussions need to be had about what does that look like as you present to the community. And so it's something you need to go to somebody who knows what they're doing to ask the right questions. But it is a 501c3. It has to check all the boxes as far as its nonprofit tax exempt purpose, which a CDC would. But that linkage is a big deal, and that's a nuance that, like I said, it's an art to really be able to communicate with the parties and to see what that organization's presentation to the community is going to look like. Is it going to be primarily religious, or is it going to be primarily a nonprofit tax exempt organization targeted toward the economically underdeveloped areas, regardless of any faith-based issues?
Thank you so much, Attorney Steve Lentz. Our next question deals with the reinstatement of a nonprofit. So I think that's probably going to be a legal question unless somebody else can jump on that. But quick few things. Yes, the question was about the documents. Yes, we will have all the presentations on our link, and we did post that on the chat room. And also the contact information of all the presenters will be also in the link documents that we're going to be posting. So the other question is about someone asking, reinstating their nonprofit. Anybody, Mr. Lentz? I believe that's going to be probably another legal questions.
Okay, then it's somebody else's turn. No, I'm kidding. There are many instances where a corporation, whether it's a nonprofit or not, can be administratively dissolved because they just haven't filed the reports, the annual reports, or paid their annual registration fee. And if if they have not filed for consecutive years, then the State Corporation Commission will administratively dissolve that corporation. Then the issue is, how long ago did that happen? Because after a period of time, you just have to start over again. But if it's within 3 years, many times you can just pay the outstanding delinquencies and just have it reinstated through a form that myself or others can access, and then make sure that the right answers are provided. So in the interim, if you pull up that corporation on the website, it'll show that it's dissolved. Somebody else can take the name and start another company with the same name. So you're losing the protection, if you would, during that time. Let me just talk about the liability, though. So if you're a corporation, then your officers and directors are supposed to be protected from personal liability. If a corporation is dissolved, then it drops down to what's called a partnership, in which all the players are jointly and severally liable. So, there's a difference between a corporation being administratively dissolved and it being terminated. And termination takes another set of papers to say this company no longer exists in any form or fashion. So there are unintended consequences from just not filing a simple form on an annual basis. Or if you intend for the corporation to stop, filing actual dissolution and liquidation and then termination of the company officially to make sure that the officers and directors are not somehow unintentionally liable for the acts of that corporation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lentz. We're going to the questions right now, and kind of go ahead and answer them as we go through them. The other question, somebody asked, they've heard that it is mandatory to have a physical place in order for you to receive a grant from the either federal government. Is that true? Anybody would like to answer that question? Yes or no? Should nonprofit has a physical location in order for them to receive a grant from the federal government? Anyone? Well, I'll take that question. The answer sometimes is all depends. First, you must look into your grant's description to see the requirements, and everything will be in the qualification section. Yes or no? What you need to have, what you need to submit with your grants in order for you to be qualified. So that's what I always say to folks who are gonna go apply for a grant. Look at the qualifications, the guidelines to see, first of all, should you even spend the time, the energy, and the money to apply. So it all depends. I'll say just check the qualification first before you submit for the grant. Just again, another update. We will post recording on the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Virginia Beach TV. So you can review or watch it for the first time and share with others, as well as the materials will be available on vbgov.com/ignite. Any questions here so far? No, I don't think we have any more questions. General questions. Let's see here. Okay, now, pandemic-wise, everybody here has some experience with nonprofits in the last few months. Going forward, what would you recommend that nonprofit adapt or do in order for them to make it through 2021 and beyond? Any advice?
I can jump in there. I can just speak from experience in the 5 district as a nonprofit. We were very active and aggressive in looking at all COVID relief funding. And that is something that everyone, if you are eligible, should take advantage of while it is available, because you just don't know when that will end. In terms of distributing and sharing, you have a good network that you can tap into. The Vibe District does as much as we can to share with other nonprofits and in our region, and also small businesses. Anytime there are relief packages put out, new opportunities available, sharing that network. So even if you find something that doesn't apply to you, pass it on, and hopefully we'll return that favor.
Yeah, and Caleb, I would agree as well. I think taking advantage of some of those opportunities like the PPP loans, they are available to nonprofit organizations as well. Also, I know that a lot of organizations, they rely heavily on some of their bigger gala types of events. And those types of events, are difficult to have now. So we're seeing more and more of them going virtually. One of the great things that we're finding, so for example, we have an event that's happening later this evening where some fantastic talent from Nashville is available. And, that way we're able to bring in sort of an elevated tier, because a lot of artists, for example, are no longer able to tour. And so they're now able to do these kinds of studio types of virtual events. And now it also opens up some of the nonprofits to their extended fan base as well, who's eager to see them online. And so a local event can now take on a national flavor. And that can be a great way to tie in with other restaurants, other different venues, for example, wineries and others that may have a packet that can be pre-sent as part of that. We're seeing more and more moves.
Awesome, great. Margaret, did you want to add something?
Just very basic. I would be very mindful when you're setting your budget for the coming year. We are on a calendar year, so we actually just went through our budget process. For many nonprofits, they're on a fiscal year. Just be really mindful of the state of the pandemic and how people are coming out, especially as it relates to any earned income, or where people are showing up to do something. Be real mindful when setting your budget.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey, Caleb, I was just going to just comment, piggyback on something that Jeff was saying, Jeff Hammer, as he was talking about, access to funding really outside of your local area, or partnering with bigger organizations or bigger grants. That's where the actual documentation of your corporation is going to be essential, because the foundation of the organization will determine how big of a structure you can build on top of it. So if you want to go from month to month to 5 years to 50 years, there is funding available, but they're not going to be interested in an organization that doesn't have its documentation together and cannot prove its business plan, its efficacy, its financials. All of those things are something that Jeff's organization and his world would have to see before they would even consider whether they want to address being a donor or partnering with a nonprofit tax exempt organization. So I just think having a team is important. And I think, if the nonprofit doesn't have a good accountant, doesn't have a good attorney, doesn't have a good financial manager in their world, they're really not going to be able to grow, but so big. So I just want to affirm what Jeff was talking about, how important that is.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to add something too. I really encourage nonprofits, of course, look for funding. I mean, cash is king, but also think about human capital. Looking at as you're trying to pivot and become or remain relevant in this current virtual atmosphere, and also looking at a sustainable way of maintaining your business processes and building capacity. Think about using skills-based volunteers. When you're, looking at revising your donation page, skills-based volunteers can do, that's a project that's like a 8 to 10 hour volunteer project for someone to use their expertise to volunteer for a nonprofit. And that helps you for paying money for someone for contracted work, which you might not have in your budget. That's money saved. We're finding that, right? Especially since like August or September, something happened, but we have a ton of people from the workplace that want to volunteer their skills virtually. So I really recommend nonprofits just look at what they're doing right now, where they need help, and can that be built into a project utilizing someone's skills through a volunteer opportunity.
All right, wonderful. Well, I certainly appreciate everyone's response to the questions and just lending your time to provide information and expertise to all of those, our participants who are listening and spent time with us from this morning until this afternoon. Fortunately, we don't have time to answer all of the other questions or comments on nonprofits, but what I can say is that's a good setup for a part 2 series for our nonprofits. So what I like to say is thank you so much, everyone, all of our participants for our panel discussion. Council Member Michael Berlucci, thank you for being here. Thank you, Ms. Stephanie Gorham, for being here from the Volunteer Hampton Roads organization. Really appreciate you. Mr. Jeff Hammer from Northwestern Mutual, so good to finally put a face with the name. Good to have you here with us today. Ms. Margaret Foltz, thank you for being here from the Virginia Beach Arts Center. Special thank you also to Attorney Steve Lentz. Thank you for your presentation and adding to our panel discussion today. Really appreciate that. And he's with Anchor Legal Group. Thank you, Ms. Kate Pittman from the Vibe District. One of my favorite districts. I like to spend more time at the Vibe District. I don't get enough time to spend there, but it's one of my favorite districts. And finally, thank you very much, Ms. Crystal. I believe it's Callahan. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, from 1701. I always hear a lot of great things about 1701. Thank you for sharing your personal story with us today and all the information about co-opting and the space that's available at 1701. Really appreciate that. And just want to say to the participants, again, thank you for sharing time with us today. I want you to know here at the City of Virginia Beach, we do love nonprofits. And again, we will have another opportunity to talk to you more about what we have available for nonprofits. But I would like to conclude this session today I want to say also special thank you to our communications department for their time and their talents today. Thank you so much, Ms. Julie Hill and Mr. Kevin Farley, for your time. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care.